Good morning. There we go. Thank you very much. Thanks so much for coming. It's the first day of spring, so that I think is first and foremost. That doesn't happen till this evening, though, I've been told. So thank you so much for coming. If you don't know me, my name's Jessica Linthorne, and I'm the Manager of Strategic Initiatives with the town of Saugeen Shores. Very proud manager of Strategic Initiatives. It's an exceptional community, great place to work, great place to be, and I'm really excited about this morning. I'm excited to introduce elected officials in a moment, and certainly our panel. Looking forward to moving forward through the morning. A couple of things before we get started. There are washrooms downstairs. If you take the staircase down to the right, so they're pretty much right below us here. There's an elevator too, if you need accessibility. The emergency exit is out the front door, and if we need to be evacuated, we'll go out the front door of the museum, and the meeting place is across the road at the Lawn Bowling Club. So before we get started, I just want to take a second to talk about the crowd and who's here and who's in our room. So we have over 75 participants registered for today. That was an exceptional turnout. We're really proud of that. We have 20 businesses directly represented, and that's not including our friends with the Chamber of Commerce and our BIAs who are representing their membership as well. Diverse group business leaders in the room, lots of different size businesses and from all different industries. So to me, that's very exciting. We have a really good cluster of people to talk with today. I do want to thank Bruce Power for sponsoring our event. I want to thank Bruce County for providing this space. It's the perfect space, the perfect venue to do this. And our food today was provided by Little Black Dog, which is a catering business in Southampton, so they're worth checking out as well. And we will have a break. So if you haven't had a chance to grab something to eat, we will have a break, so please do eat up. Okay, so I am going to do a couple of introductions, and we'll have a quick intro from a few people, and then we're going to pass it off to Cheryl Brine from OMAFRA, and she's going to facilitate our conversation for this morning. So first, I'd like to welcome Mayor of Saugeen Shores, Mayor Luke Charbonneau, to come say a few words.
Thank you, Jess. Good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful morning out there, and we really appreciate you all being here this morning in here to participate in this important discussion with us. For those of you who aren't from Saugeen Shores, I want to welcome you to Saugeen Shores. This is the fastest growing community in our region, and we are ranked one of the best places to live in this country. And Saugeen Shores is undergoing a real significant boom. We have the nation's largest infrastructure project taking place just down the road at Bruce Power, a $13 billion project. We have a thriving tourism industry. We have a thriving agricultural industry. We're really in the middle of an exceptional time in this community. But what we found in the last couple of years is that all of that is taking place in the context of this broader labor shortage. And it really is a broad issue. It's a national issue. In fact, I was just down at the Canadian Nuclear Association conference in Ottawa late in February, and while we were there, our MP, Ben Lobb, was good enough to get me connected with some MPs from across the country, really, who we were right from Edmonton to Fredericton and points in between, and we were talking about the labor shortage issue, and the one message they gave back to me every time was, yeah, we have that problem in our community too. So it really is a pan-Canadian issue, but it's an issue that, for Saugeen Shores, is very acutely felt right now because we have all of this opportunity. We have this great potential, this great moment that we could seize. And it's an opportunity that some of our businesses are having difficulty seizing because of their trouble finding labor. So that's why we really wanted to have this discussion today, why we're really happy that you're all here to have it with us, because it's something we need to get our hands around, something we need to understand, and I'm really excited about today, but I'm actually more excited about what we do next after what we hear today. I will be taking away certainly what I hear today to the County of Bruce and advocating with other levels of government as we push to find solutions to this issue, both at a local level and at a regional level. So I'm very excited about this morning, really looking forward to it. And just before I let you all go, I really have to say a huge thank you to Jessica Linthorne. She says she's proud to be our Manager of Strategic Initiatives. We're more proud that she is our Manager of Strategic Initiatives. And I want to say just a huge thank you to her. This was a huge amount of work, and it was great. So if you would all do me a big favor and give her a big round of applause, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the kind words. And I never tire of hearing Mayor Charbonneau say we're the fastest growing community in the region and ranked as one of the best places to live in Canada. So let's say that a few more times today if we could. I'd like to introduce John McPhee on behalf of MPP Lisa Thompson to bring remarks.
Thank you, Jessica. Yes, Lisa could not be here. She actually was here last night. She was in the house yesterday, came up for dinner with the kickoff of the OSSA hockey tournament, and then went straight back to Queen's Park for another day of meetings and question period. But she did want me to attend, especially with Saugeen Shores being the fastest growing community in Bruce County. But she's going to ask me to give her a full detailed report, and so I'm going to be taking diligent notes. And in my former life, I used to be a journalist, so hopefully my accuracy has improved. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And just one, before we introduce our MP, one thing to note, the event is being video recorded, so we will have this posted on our YouTube channel following the event. If you have any concern with that video, you can come and chat with me, but certainly you can see where our video is, so if you sit behind him, we're free and clear. So thanks for that, and that'll be a good reference point for all of us and for us to share with our neighbors, and certainly for our neighbors to share that video link with their Chamber of Commerce, BIAs, and their businesses as well. I'd like to introduce our MP, Ben Lobb, to come and say a few words. Thanks, Ben.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. We have a beautiful, which I will say, a riding of Huron County and Bruce County, and it is an economic engine for our region. And to be quite honest with you, I was elected in 2008, and since that time, this region has really had a tight labor market, believe it or not. And if you remember back to 2008 and 2009, really with the height of the economic downturn, this region, and specifically this area, was completely in an economic bubble, as the end of the refurbishment was, well, I guess it was not quite the end, but as it was working through the refurbishment process and a strong agricultural economy, we weathered the downturn almost better than any other region in the country, to be quite honest. And as we look at 2017, 18, and now we're into 2019, we are in a very tight labor market, and we are looking for any kind of workers that we can find. And I'm sure there's people that are better versed at this than I, but I think a 4% unemployment rate would be considered fully employed, a fully employed economy, a fully employed community, and we are certainly at that level for sure. There's a number of reasons why we are at this level. Of course, baby boomers such as my father, they are happily retired, as is my mother, and they're not looking to get back into the workforce in their 70s. And our youth that are coming through the ranks, there's just not enough youth to fill the gap. And so in our immigration system in our country, it's one of the best immigration systems in the world. Over 300,000 Canadians come to this country through a number of different programs, and they certainly add and are really what helps keep this economy going. And so one of the key things that we need to do as we move forward is to be able to better fill and better fit those Canadians that are new Canadians that are coming into the country, to encourage them to come to Bruce County and Huron County and see what a tremendous opportunity it is for them, what a great place it is to raise a family, and how overwhelmingly welcoming the community is to them. And so we have so much to offer. There's a ton of resources that we can look at, but I think Mayor Luke is correct in what he says in the fact that we have to compile the data and present that data to the federal government and others to be able to entice and create programs. And I think as we go on, there's a pilot program in Atlantic Canada that would make a lot of sense, and there's a rural and remote immigration program as well. So I thank you for the invitation. I missed some of the ruckus yesterday in the House of Commons. I'm going to miss some of the ruckus today in the House of Commons. But if you tune in to CPAC tonight at 2 or 3 in the morning, you'll see me voting. So I don't have to worry about my hair getting messed. It is what it is. So have a great day, and we'll be listening intently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce our facilitator for today, Cheryl Brine. Cheryl is a big mentor for me. She's a huge supporter of Saugeen Shores, the fastest growing community in Bruce County and ranked as one of the best places to live in Canada. And Cheryl works with OMAFRA, so that's the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. And she's exceptional at the facilitator role, and I'm so pleased that she's here. So please join me in welcoming Cheryl, and I'm going to let her take over the mic for now.
Thanks very much, Jessica. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the discussion, and I look forward to hear from our panel as well. I am going to introduce our panel now, and we have 4 panel members this morning that we will be hearing from. The first panel member I'd like to introduce is Gemma Mendez-Smith. Gemma is the Executive Director of the 4-County Labour Market Planning Board, serving Bruce, Grey, Huron, and Perth counties. She has been working in the area of labor market development for over 17 years. During her time with the Planning Board, Gemma has learned that labor market planning is a key to success for communities that expect to participate in the global economy. Our next speaker is Pat Jellison. Pat is a public affairs and strategy expert with over 10 years of experience working with local, provincial, and federal governments. His passion for agriculture led him to the position of director with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, which represents 38,000 farms and farm families across Ontario. Pat has recently started working with Michael Keegan and Associates, a government and business consulting firm based in Guelph. Our next panel member is Ashley Whedon. Ashley is a PhD student and research assistant at the University of Guelph. She's also an award-winning rural innovator who currently splits her time between Ontario's Bruce and Wellington counties. Her work leading Grey County's Connected County Initiative directly contributed to the county receiving recognition as one of the top achievers in its population category. Ashley also provided strategic communications and community engagement support for the largest publicly funded regional broadband project in Canada to date, the Southwestern Integrated Fiber Technology Initiative, and you may know that as SWIFT. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Ryan Gibson, and that's the last time I'll use doctor because he asked if I could refer to him as Ryan, so I'd like to introduce Ryan. Ryan's originally from rural Manitoba and has a deep intrigue and respect for rural communities, rural people, and the events that shape their future. Over the last decade, Ryan has been engaged in research projects and community development processes focused on new forms of governance, regional collaboration, cooperatives, rural philanthropy, rural revitalization, immigration, and migration. Currently, Ryan is the Libero Professor in Regional Economic Development at the School of Environmental Design and Rural Development at the University of Guelph. Please join me in welcoming our panel members for today's discussion. Now I'd like to call on the Gemma to sort of set the stage for today's discussion and giving us an overview of what's happening locally. Gemma, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Pat. Absolutely. So we know that we're in a labor shortage, but let's put it into perspective as to what's happening in our region. And our region I will be referring to is the economic region of Stratford-Bruce Peninsula, which includes the 4-county region of Bruce, Grey, Huron, and Perth. And it's really nice that we're able to get that information so we know exactly where we sit within this whole labor market and labor market economic situation. So for last year, 2018, we ended at a 3.7% unemployment rate, which is the lowest, I should have you know, across the province, but it's been the lowest any economic region has seen in the past decade. So when we looked at that information, we thought, okay, it's no wonder that we're experiencing a more acute labor shortage than anywhere else in the province. I know that the province everyone's talking about the fact that they have labor shortage problems, but I have to tell you that this economic region is more acute. We have that low unemployment rate, and we have migration issues where people are moving in and out of our region, and we are talking about how do we keep people here. So that's the first thing. It's our low economic region, which our MP referred to as full employment. When we look at those numbers, we are looking at full employment. The people who are left in that, still looking for work, usually have a few barriers that keep them from the workforce, and that actually keeps them maybe even longer from the workforce or not as engaged as they can be, fully engaged. The second thing that we look at as a workforce development board is numbers of people in the workforce. So in our last local labour market plan that we have produced, you will see that between 2004 and 2016, our workforce has decreased by over 18,000 people. So not only do we have a low unemployment rate, we also have a shrinking labour market. So that makes us think about all the ways then that we need to encourage people within our region, outside of our region, to get engaged in this labour market. There's so much economic vibrancy happening across Bruce, Grey Huron, and Perth counties that we need to be able to support our employers and our workforce in the way that they need to be supported. The other thing that we look at is participation rates. And as we look at the participation rate, we see that most of our cohorts within our labour market participate at a much higher rate per capita as the province. So we are experiencing people that are looking for work and working at a much higher rate than the province, except for the 55 to 64-year-olds. That's the only cohort that's underrepresented in that participation rate. So there's a group of people that we could be looking at to enhance and hone in on using their skills and experience that they bring to the labour market. And so when we talk about what's happening across our labour market, we have businesses that are needing people. We have businesses that are growing, expanding, but we don't have enough people to fill those jobs. And so when we look overall at that, we need to be looking at how do we grow this labour market? How do we make this labour market bigger to make sure that we meet all of the needs of our local employers and all the businesses that exist, and all of the sectors that exist within this economy? So when we put that out there, talking about this today makes sense. And you know, it's really exciting for me as a local labour market board, planning board, because workforce planning always is at every table, it's at every discussion. But this is kind of the first time we've had it, one of the first times that we've had it as the topic of how we're going to deal with this, what's the strategy we're going to put in place, and what is the action we're going to take from today. And this is very exciting work for me, because I know this is what we need to be doing to make sure that that's top of mind for business and economic development as we continue to support our economy in Bruce, Grey Huron, and Perth counties. Cheryl, I'm not sure how long you want me to go on, but I can stop there and we can move on to the others.
All right. Thank you, Gemma. We will hear from the panel in a few minutes because I have some questions for them, but I'd also... Oh, sorry. I thought I was doing something wrong. I'd also like to have you listen to some local success stories and local stories and things that are happening locally. We have 3 people from the local area who are going to give a little bit of a brief background of their business and sort of what's happening for them. I'd like to start with Stephen Harris from Rosina's. Stephen, if you could, Jessica is bringing you over a mic.
Thanks very much. You're on? And thanks for the panel also coming down today. I'm Stephen Harris. 2 companies I have locally is Harris Management Group, which is investment properties and both commercial and residential, as well as condominium management. We also have locally Ristorante Rosina. I'm actually a graduate of University of Guelph, and we started investing in this area about 12 to 13 years ago, and my family moved up permanently about 7 years ago. We enjoyed the area. We've had our boat in this area for a long time, and started working in the real estate industry, as I mentioned, about 20 years ago, and investing here. The biggest problem I see within this area is not necessarily the jobs that Bruce Power related companies, higher end management, but is of the service industry. And what we find is the housing is the biggest concern, and it continues to rise. So we have sufficient staff within our team, but we constantly lose them, and not to other businesses, but they move out of the area. Last year alone, we had 20% of our staff relocate to the Tri-City area. None of them had connections there. They just found that the housing was the same price, the jobs were plentiful, and and they could get transit. This area doesn't have any transit, and is a big concern for a lot of tenants. Especially we have some that are walking 2 to 3 kilometers per day each way to come into work. We have staff that are working in our area, but are coming from Paisley, Tara, and different areas. We have to pay them a rate that is able to support that. We also have 7 of our 16 people that work at the restaurant, which I provide housing for them at more than 25% below rate what I could get in the market. And looking at rates now with Bruce Power coming in, I'm less than 50% of what I could get by putting that in. So overall, our business, unfortunately, has taken a huge suffer from this. We are keeping it open, but to give an example, it is a consideration that we would close, even though the market with businesses coming up are more plentiful in this area. Talking to quite a few other business owners within the area, they have either closed or are looking to relocate simply due to the same situation. So there is a full market, I guess you would say, of people working, but those that are leaving are not impacting what we see the labor shortage. Housing and transit to me are the biggest factors which we need to see. And if transit doesn't come shortly, I think this will become a huge problem within the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for sharing your story and also confirming some of the things that we're hearing all the time about transportation and housing and those kind of things. So thank you for sharing that story with us. I'd like to ask Pierre Danini from Queens to share his story now.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Pierre Danini. I own the Queens Bar and Grill. I've owned and operated it for 16 years. I am married to Kathy Wentworth, who has roots in this community stretching back to the 1800s. So I like to call myself a local via marriage. The Queens has evolved over many years from a very classic small town hotel, as they call it. I still bristle when somebody calls the Queens a hotel. And into a sort of a dining entertainment hub, as we like to refer to it now. We have 32 employees, which surprises people all the time. And frankly, I could probably have 40 employees and still be a little tight. So we've dealt with this issue a couple ways. I used to buy and sell things for a living in a former life, and so the notion of supply and demand is sort of burned into my memory. And labor, I view labor as a resource that is priced by a market, and therefore you have to move with the market. I think a lot of businesses wish Saugeen Shores was in the 70s, like it used to be, idyllic, etc. You know, but the fact of the matter is, we aren't that anymore. We got a lot of that good stuff from there, but we have a lot of great new good stuff. Let's say, for lack of a better word. I don't think Bruce Power is a problem for our labor. I don't have a single employee that would work at Bruce Power, so I'm not competing with them. I think housing is an issue, but I think the real issue is transportation, because I think there is transportation within, I believe there is housing within, say, 30, 40 kilometers of the Queens that would suffice for service workers like I employ, but they just don't know how to get there. So some of the things we figured out, and some of it is just dumb luck, and some of it is my brilliant management, so the Queens has 9 apartments up above it. 5 of them are rented by employees. These are actually important employees to me. They do not have transportation. I priced the apartments below market so that they are able to afford it, and it is most definitely a perk of working for us. If I had any vacancies in the other apartments that are non-workers, I would keep them vacant and use them as a recruiting tool if I had the opportunity. So that's one way we are. The other way is in November we bought a benefits package for our entire staff. So now there's a real transience to workers in the restaurant and bar industry. And what I've been trying to do, and I had a long-term employee come to me and say, after we did the benefits package, he said, Pierre, this is actually turning into a real job. And I go, yeah, no kidding. Me too. so it was, and they're starting to feel that. And that goes to something Ben touched on, which I think we have a societal thing going on here. This is not just about Bruce County. It's a societal thing. So what we're trying to do is treat these people differently. Money is not the only motivator anymore. They want to feel part of something. They want to feel like they are making a difference, no matter what job they are doing. And so we go to great lengths to make sure they understand that. And I've also raised everybody's wages, and I keep doing it because it's a commodity and it's scarce, and the price should be higher. And that's as simple as that. And I don't view these things as burdens, because does it mean I have less money in my own personal pocket this month? Yes, but I view it as an investment, because if it secures the viability of my business long term, then it's kind of worth it. So I think that's all I've got. I could go on forever, you know me.
Thanks, Pierre, for sharing that and also confirming some of the things that we're hearing, but some of the things that you've tried to instill in and do to help employees. So we thank you for that. I'd also like to introduce Rod Rice from Rice Development, West Links.
Thank you very much. My name is Rod Rice. I'm with Rice Development Company, and we're building houses around the West Links Golf Course in the Port Elgin area. And we have been experiencing a lot of the labor shortage issues that we're here to talk about today. And we consider that to be a really critical issue in order for us to be able to keep producing the houses at a relatively economical price. I want to tell you a couple of stories that were really positive for us last year and have got us as a company thinking about how we can build on that. And that is that almost out of the blue, the high school, which is only about a half a kilometer from where our site is, came to us and said, we want to use our building trades co-op students on your site. So they came on site. They actually were working with the carpentry team that we had, but ultimately we developed a relationship with the school. And we had 20 kids who are in that program who did carpentry work for us under the supervision of their teacher. And it was, first of all, a great learning experience for them, but it was a real eye-opener for us because we saw that there is this pool of talent that is here in town if we can persuade them to stay in town. And we've made the decision in our company to try to continue to develop that relationship with the high school and to see whether we can come up with means that will encourage those kids to stay in the area. Now, not all of them wanted to be carpenters. Some of them wanted to be electricians, plumbers, and so on, which to me is good news. That's a good news story. And I don't have any brilliant solutions as to how we keep those kids here, but I think as a community and certainly as an individual company here in town, I think we need to be looking at that and saying, okay, how can we encourage those kids to stay, first of all, in the trades, and then secondly, here in the Saugeen Shores area. The second story I want to tell you sort of dovetails with what I've heard from the other two gentlemen, and that is that housing is an issue. And we operate a golf course as well as the residential development that's going on there. And we've recently had to bring in our management team and a lot of field workers, field staff from the London area. And we are providing them with a dormitory type facility there. And that was the real appeal to bringing one or two of these people up, because they could not get housing here. And of course, coming from London, it's a bit, they're leaving the community in which they live to come into a new community. it's our hope that as they get established here, they're going to see that Saugeen Shores is the place they want to be and they want to bring their families. So we are going to pursue that a little bit more, and that might even work with respect to some of the construction trades as well, to give them the ability to be in the area at a relatively low cost. And of course, typical housing here, certainly on the rental side, is not largely available, and it's not all that cheap either. So that's an issue that needs to be addressed, and I had said to Jessica that our company, between now and the end of the year, are going to try to come up with a strategy, an internal strategy, as to how we can keep those kids on board. And we're obviously most eager to work with anyone in this room to encourage that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our 3 local stories and for sharing some of the struggles that you've had, but also some of the solutions you've come up with, and keeping that in mind as the panel answers some questions around the labor shortage issue. So I'd like to start with some questions for the panel now. And Pat, I'd like to start with you. And thinking of the local stories we've just heard, do these stories align with sort of what's happening in that agricultural experience?
They do, quite simply. I'm encouraged to hear some of the stories that I heard today, actually, because a lot of these issues are not new to agriculture. Agriculture has been dealing with labor shortage issues for a very long time, well, all through the century, actually. And some of the solutions I'm hearing are also ones that we find in agriculture as well. The housing issues that I've heard, some of the solutions from the Queens and the golf course, are solutions that the ag industry has done. So, I mean, I think there's something there to learn from as well, from the ag industry, providing housing, temporary housing, and housing that's available if you're working for that employee. That's been something that we've seen a lot, especially in the seasonal type of agriculture, the seasonal workers. A lot of them come from other countries here as well. Having housing available for them is obviously very important. It also provides them with a bit of a community and like-minded people as well. So I think there's a social aspect to that as well. When you do provide housing through your own business, you're keeping people with like-minded concerns and stuff like that. And it's a social issue that keeps people there. So agriculture's seen that historically as well. And historically, we've also struggled a bit too with some of the programs that we've had to have seasonal workers come to the area. But enabling the housing situation is certainly one very, very important point to make. I can't stress that enough.
Okay, thank you, Pat, for sharing that. I forgot to mention that we will have a time for questions for the panel after the discussion, so if you can hold your questions till the end, that would be great. Thank you. Ashley and Ryan, do the local stories you heard also align with your perspective on the rural workforce? I don't know which one wants to start first.
It's a Canadian standoff. So I think a couple of things on the stories is that you're not alone, right? I think you can go to any conference, you can go to any business association meeting and hear the same stories repeated by people across Ontario and definitely across Canada. So I think there's some solidarity to be had in saying, okay, we're all facing the same issues. At the same time, we're all facing the same issues, so what are we going to do about that? And I think you have individual business owners that are trying to accomplish particular strategies. However, I'm looking around this room and I'm really encouraged that it's not the typically pale, male, and stale group of folks that are usually talking about this issue. Because typically we have decision makers. I mean, it's more diverse than a lot of discussions that are happening about this. And that's said somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but actually a really important thing when you're talking about the kind of people you're looking to attract to your community, right? If you're talking about the kinds of jobs that are available or that you're trying to fill, you have to really think about the kind of people that are going to be filling those jobs. You also have to think about them as people, right? This is not just a resource issue. These are people that are seeking meaningful work, that want somewhere decent to live, that want a connection to their community, and want to be able to get there within a reasonable cost. There are all kinds of solutions that we're seeing coming up with that, but they do require a commitment to maybe formalizing some of those arrangements of saying if you're going to build development or you're going to convert some buildings into housing, so many units have to be dedicated to affordable or attainable housing. You have to look at strategies that you can use to work with the community to develop that, to maybe encode some of the strategies that are happening so that your individual business owners don't feel like, I'm doing this by myself, I'm doing this strategy because it's the only thing I can think of. On the transit side, this is a huge issue for rural Canada in general. Right? We're a geographically huge community here in Grey Bruce. That's even compounded between the distance between our urban centers. And there are some solutions, like Innisfil has done an agreement with Uber to arrange some of those aspects. I would urge some caution around that because the data being collected by Uber is often your most vulnerable or most targeted members of your community. That data is often housed in an American server, and they can sell that to people. So I would urge a little bit of caution around who you enter with partnerships around arranging that with, but it's certainly an option. And finally, you have to create good experiences for people to want to come back. It's not a bad thing for youth to leave. It's good to go and experience different communities, to get an education somewhere else. But you want to create a meaningful place for them to come back to, and that means good memories. I'll give a great anecdote that I bounced around a lot. I grew up in southwestern Ontario, but we have a cottage on Saugeen First Nation. We have had that for 40 years. I've spent my entire life trying to get up here, and when a job came up in Grey County, I jumped on it at 26 and moved here in December. I thought, what have I done? Because it was very cold. But I loved living and working in that community. And a lot of that had to do with the feelings that I had related to the broader area. And finally, I think the strength of a regional approach, right? When we say that we're all in this together, we're all facing the same problems, it's not just Saugeen Shores, it's looking to how you can work with your neighbors. Maybe there is a transit solution that's being developed over in Grey County that would apply here in Bruce County, and I think the strength of your economic development network, I know that Jess and her colleagues meet quite frequently, not only on a county level, but on a regional level to develop those solutions, is to really leverage that network. You can't be all things to all people as a small community, but there are ways that you can leverage each other's strengths to come up with different solutions. So I would say that certainly aligns.
Thank you. Can I just ask panel members to make sure you speak into the mic?
Sorry, I don't know if I have a problem being heard.
Thank you. Ryan.
I'll take notes here. So I would echo what Ashley was saying. You've not been singled out to suffer the slings and arrows of the market. This is something that every rural community across this country and internationally is struggling to grapple with as well, but most are not even having the conversation yet. They tend to have the blinders up to say that this isn't a problem or this is something unique just to our area, when in reality there are a lot of communities that are going through this new re-envisionment around how do we work in the globalized economy. You're not competing with the community down the road or the restaurant down the road, you're competing with communities around Ontario, across the country, and even internationally. And so how we've done things in the past may not always be the way we want to work forward in the future. That's a really important thing to remember. So it's not all about, you've not been singled out by any means. The other piece of it, and it was great to hear, is that our urban audiences often think of rural and small towns as being in decline, no opportunities, a waste of public investment. And that's not the case, but unfortunately that seems to be the dominant narrative that we see coming out on a regular basis, which starts to hinder our impacts when we start to think about how do we attract people to move out of those urban areas into smaller communities to help fill the labor force, because they have sometimes these romanticized versions of what they anticipate they might find when they move out here. And it's always quite interesting to hear this. I was working with a group of recent arrivals into Canada, and I asked them about rural communities and what they thought of it, and the two most common responses blew me away. That was Anne of Green Gables and Jack London's Call of the Wild. You know, these did happen. Those were the imageries of rural and northern communities many years ago, but that's not the reality today. But that was their touchstone. They came from a very urban economy where their home country, and they don't have a perspective of what it means to live in small towns. And so the alignment to what's happening elsewhere in the country really suggests that globalization, huge factor, the notion of creative destruction. We're taking jobs that used to be done by people that are now being done through automation and through different technologies is having a huge impact. One of the things that reminded me of this when Gemma was speaking is that just because someone's retiring from the labor force does not mean the job will be replaced. And so we can't make that assumption that we're always going to have those positions in our community. And the other thing that I would really encourage us to think about, and it was, I think, evident in the three stories that were shared, is it's not just about the job. Workforce development today, especially in small towns,
is not solely about a job. It's not about the amount of money you get per hour, because we know that the number one motivation for millennials, who are now the majority of the workforce, is not wages. The number one inspiration for them is the motivation of the work that they're doing, that they're passionate about. And so whether you get $10 an hour versus $20 an hour, what's the driving motivation is their desire to be connected to something that's meaningful, that's going to inspire them, and to have them performing something that's meaningful for them and their community. But at the end of the day, they need to have access to good quality education for their children, recreation, housing availability, whether it's transit or other opportunities. And so it's not just about the job. And that speaks to Ashley's comment around collaboration. You can provide the best job with the best wages, but if they can't find a family doctor or have a school for their children or have a sports opportunity, they're probably not going to come, or if they do come, they're probably not going to stay. So we have to think about this labor force replacement, the workforce development, in a much broader sense than just solely jobs. Because if we just focus on jobs, we're going to have challenges around keeping people, and that means you'd be constantly becoming a region that's almost like a springboard to a swimming pool, whereby people, you attract them to move in, but they can't stay because there's no affordable housing, there's no services, or whatever the case might be. So we'd encourage us to think very broadly around how do we look for solutions to some of these issues, and how do we re-envision the assets that we already have in our community, maybe in different ways that we haven't thought of before, but we have opportunities to do it, because no one's really saying you can't do that. The sky's the limit around creativity, and this is where I think particularly of a really interesting example coming out of Ireland around transportation. Small communities, it was around mail delivery, and the Postal Service was going to stop delivering mail on a daily basis into some communities, and a few that I was working with decided that they were going to bid for the RFP to deliver mail into their communities. But the reason they wanted to do it was not to deliver mail. That was the least of their worries. But it meant that a van would have to go every day into the neighboring city to pick up mail, and that van was going to have maybe 10 envelopes and 2 parcels, and that community bought a 12-passenger van. Why? Because they wanted to transport people. They knew they would have the money to operate the service by just doing the mail delivery, but it meant that they now had a bus that could take people in for medical appointments. It could help young people get to education or training opportunities. And they viewed it as much bigger than just simply that mail delivery opportunity. So we've got those kind of assets in our communities and our regions. We just have to think about how to use them maybe in a different way or in a creative way to help address some of these challenges.
Thanks, Ryan. Gemma just asked if she could say something, so I guess I'll let her.
Okay,
Gemma.
thank you. Actually, just a couple of things to bring it back to us, as you were talking about more broadly, globally and nationally. We just recently executed an employee survey, and that really gives us some insights on how employees across Bruce Grey, Huron, and Perth counties think about their employment and the engagement in employment. And a couple of things that came out. First of all, we had 758 people respond to that survey. And people were calling us after we closed the survey and said, oh my gosh, I missed the deadline. So that was unfortunate. We didn't open it up. But certainly the information that was shared there was more around, I think, 3rd or 4th on the list of why would you take a job or why do you stay in your job is around the wages. It was more around value and respect in the workplace. And in fact, one thing that came out across the region and was the idea, the concept perception of bullying or harassment in the workplace. And so as we talk about why people stay engaged in a workplace, we need to look at all of these reasons why people decide to leave. And some people decide to leave to not go to another job, but just leave the labor market. And so really considering how we work with our employees and making sure that they have what they need to continue to support us as businesses, that's a consideration we need to take as businesses. You know, listening to those stories, I think about our own story at the 4 County Labour Market Planning Board. We have been looking to fill a labour market analyst position for almost a year now, and we can't find someone. And it's either they don't have transportation, it's not the skills. We have people with the skills, we're connected to the university, but it's the transportation, the housing, all the other pieces. So recently at one of our staff meetings, we just said, you know what, why don't we look at skills? Why don't we hire people for the skills that we need across the board? And within minutes of making that decision that we're not looking for a labor market analyst, we have a researcher in our office already. That researcher will do all the research that every project we ever do needs. And then the other person we need maybe is more of a community development person. We changed that idea right away. We changed the job description, and wouldn't you believe it, in half an hour I had applications on my desk of local people that were looking to get into the workforce. So as we talk about innovation and strategies around engaging that workforce or finding the people you need, you might need to think differently about the jobs that you're putting out there, how you're advertising them. There are some people that are moving to our region that are retired. Early retirees have lots of skills and experience to offer us, but we're not talking about part-time employment. Can we carve a job that 2 really experienced people can do and still get what we need and engage that early retiree workforce? So lots of things that we can think about differently. We just have to think about how we get the work done and how we manage that with the people that we need to get from our communities or have moved here. So just a couple of things around those stories that I heard.
No, that's great. Thanks, Gemma. I appreciate that. Ashley and Ryan, this next question is for you, and then the remainder of the questions will be for the whole panel. You kind of touched on some of this, but do the stories that you heard, should we be focusing on attracting a workforce from the GTA or other urban centers? And you talked a little bit about that, Ryan, a little bit, but what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so it is, when you look at the paper, the statistics, a huge pool of potential employees that could move out to regions to help address labor shortages that people were discussing. But there are some challenges in doing so. So some food for thought around this. And there may be maybe 2 big questions that you might want to ask before engaging in these strategies. One is, who are you looking for? And it kind of builds on Gemma's comment. Are you looking for a specialized position, a skill set? But also, what are the motivations of those that you're trying to attract coming out to your community? What expectations do they have of your rural community or your region? And how do you communicate with those urban audiences around the opportunities that are here? So getting over the Call of the Wild and Anne of Green Gables, how do you get people to understand what is the reality in your community? And those are huge challenges. Simply putting out a job advertisement in the Toronto Star or other urban media will get you lots of applications, but are you getting the people that are going to fit into your region, that are going to contribute to your region, is the big question. And we've seen a number of initiatives that are experimenting with this. One is the Peel Newcomer Centre, bringing out predominantly new arrivals to Canada within the last 3 to 5 years that are interested in entrepreneurship or business development. And they come out on a bus, they get to visit the region. I think the last one they were in was in North Wellington and maybe...
We were recently in Grey County.
In Grey County, I was going to say Bruce, but Grey County. And they get to meet with local actors, local businesses, local community members to find out what's there and to start asking those questions to ensure that when they're wanting to come out, that they're coming out for the right reasons and to contribute to the local economy. But again, it goes back to the question of, you can put out every job advertisement in downtown Toronto and recruit 2,000 people for jobs, but if they don't have a place to live, or they can't get to their place of employment, we still have some big fundamental challenges that we need to address. So there is an audience in urban areas. There are lots of people that want to leave the downtown environment. They want a backyard. They want an affordable house. They want to have a different lifestyle that rural communities like this region can offer. But the question becomes how to reach those people and how to ensure that when they come out that there are appropriate services for them to enjoy their livelihood.
I would add to that telling your story as the fastest growing community in this region and one of the best places to live in Canada is a really important part of that. So we know that people, particularly newcomers to Canada, they land at Pearson and they hardly ever make it more than half an hour down the highway, right? And a lot of that has to do with immediacy, right? You land there, you get a little bit outside the airport and you go, okay, good enough for now. And then good enough for now becomes good enough for the next 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, and then their family comes or people that they know in their network comes. And that's how you have the build out of different kinds of communities related to that core. It's access points. I used to joke when I worked at Grey County that no one ended up there by mistake. It was a really purposeful decision. No one just kind of wanders up Highway 6 and goes, okay, I'm staying here. And you can leverage that to your advantage, right? That this is a purposeful decision to locate in your community. And that builds on Ryan's comments of what is the story you're telling to attract the kind of people that you want to come to your community? And are you just telling that to yourselves, or are you telling that to the kind of people that need to hear it? There's been some really successful stuff just to your immediate neighbors to the south in Minto, that they've had some really great relocation programs with newcomers to Canada. And a lot of that has to do with the personal touch associated with that. It's like, we will bring you up. You can come into the community. I think George Bridge shakes the hand of every newcomer that comes to the community. And that's a very George Bridge thing to do. But these are things that say, you are welcome here. You're a part of this community. And whether those newcomers that you're attracting to me are coming from Toronto, they're coming from Vancouver, or they're coming from somewhere else in the world, that attachment to place and that feeling of we really want you here is really important. I think there's sometimes a tendency to sort of talk out of both sides of our mouths as rural and small town communities to say, we want new people to come here, but we don't want you to change the quality of our community, or we don't want you to do different things here. And I think we have to get more comfortable with saying, this is who we are right now, this is who we have been, here's the kind of community we're looking to become, and we'd really like you to co-create that future with us. Discussions like this are really important as part of telling that story. You're hearing things today that are really valuable, but then going out and telling that to people that don't live here is really important. The idea of it being a good place to live is a great narrative, but it's also the same narrative that Nelson, BC has, that St. John's has, that almost every other small and rural community can say the same thing. So when you're talking about competitive advantage of how you're going to attract people, deciding exactly what makes you different is really important, and then lean into that. You're not going to appeal to everybody, but you don't want to appeal to everybody. You want to appeal to the specific kind of people that are going to come and live here. And the best people you have for leveraging that are the people who already love you, right? Your businesses that are already growing and successful, that are doing things to try to attract and retain people, is to amplify those things. One really successful strategy that Grey County did was a lot of profiles of those businesses. Some of them were people that had moved from Toronto to set up things like Hartwood Home and Hartwood Hall. These were people that had been phenomenally successful in the downtown Toronto arts and culture scene. And so there was a really big profile on why Grey? Why Owen Sound? Why did you come here? And I think these are things that, certainly in Saugeen Shores and in broader Bruce County, you have a wealth of people that are like that have chosen to build their businesses here. So tell their stories, not just the broader Saugeen Shores is great, the people in Saugeen Shores are great.
Great, thank you, Ashley and Ryan. The next question is for the whole panel. So let's kind of think about how we're training people. So is the next generation set up for success around that piece of training? And what would your thoughts be around that? I don't know who wants to start. Okay, thanks, Gemma.
I think we're doing better. We certainly are doing a lot better at getting information out to our youth and general public about what the skills are that are needed in the region, and we can do much more around that. But if we continue, I was actually intrigued by Rod's connection with the school, because as we talk about skill trades, every news release you see recently has been about the skill trades. We've been talking skill trades. I've been with the board over 17 years. The board has been in existence for over 21. We've always talked about skill trades, but this is the first time that it's actually getting, I think, the profile that it needs, because we are coming into that crunch time where we don't have people to replace the retirees that we're expecting to leave the workforce. So getting the information out, but I see that there's a lot of work also going on around getting that training offered locally. And I think that really helps. The average age of a skilled trades person right now is about between 26 and 28. People within that age range may have already started a family. They may have already had commitments. So making sure that skilled trades opportunity is available locally, but also available for their schooling portion of it, more accessible, whether it's evenings or different ways of connecting to that training, will help people be more successful. Although we have people going into the skilled trades, we have a high rate of incompletes. And I know that the government, the Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities has been dealing with that topic. And so we're moving more towards that. We've got some of the unions, the different unions, CUSW, the Carpenters Union. They're working with us to make sure that this is a message that gets out. And I think the more of those collaborations among the businesses, the school boards, and the associations that work with the training pieces will help us to be successful. Getting into the schools, we see more activity happening around, and I'll stick with the skilled trades. There are many more things we can talk about: healthcare, agriculture, all of the pieces that support our workforce. But certainly the skilled trades has been top of mind for people over the last few years, and making sure that we are able to provide that training locally. And it's really exciting to hear that the school board, the business, Rod, and with the high school. And Rod, there are many opportunities to partner and keep people here, because they really don't have to go away for skilled trades training, do they? They have to get an employer locally to sponsor them. So that's the biggest thing. If we can get employers locally to sponsor people who are interested in the skilled trades, then we can keep them here, and then they can go off to school if they need to, but they will come back because they have a job. And it's really great when we talk about growing your workforce. We want to talk about ways that we can also engage people that already live here. Why encourage people to move away because they don't have those opportunities, and then try to get them back when they've already settled somewhere else? Why don't we start before they even leave? Let them know the opportunities, engage them. So when they think about where am I going to land in my career, they're thinking Saugeen Shores, because they've already had that connection. So the more businesses we can engage in getting involved in the skilled trades piece, we can certainly grow and continue to engage that workforce.
Thanks, Gemma. Pat?
Yeah, well, in agriculture, we've always had a pretty good time of training people when they come to the farm, come to the industry in agriculture. We're doing a pretty good job there. In fact, we're doing a really good job because a lot of the people coming from farms, for example, and we'd like to encourage them to be in agriculture and to find careers in agriculture. They go to school. They go to Guelph, for example, an agriculture school, or they go to Ridgetown for a college program. They'll learn business, they'll learn economics degrees, they'll have bachelors of commerce and whatever. They'll have bachelors of arts and science and everything related to agriculture. But then other industries realize that, hey, these are very well qualified people. So we get poached pretty quick. I see a lot of my friends and colleagues do end up in other industries as well. So, but with that said, I think we're already training people really well to do work. People are being very well educated. We used to always have to explain to people how to do things. That's where the training comes in, and when to do them, and what they're doing, and that sort of thing. But with the new reality and the new generation and the millennials, and we've talked about the millennials a little bit here. Now we have to show them why. Money isn't the the thing that makes them want to be there anymore. They want to know why. Ken Hitchcock, one of the best coaches in the NHL, coaches the Edmonton Oilers now. Well, yeah, I shouldn't call him the best yet, but they're doing. He's bringing it around anyway. He mentioned the same thing. He used to have to show the hockey players, how to do things and when to do them and what they're doing. They're making millions of dollars, and he goes, now I have to explain to them why. Can you imagine that? Making all that money and you still have to explain why you're doing this. So he's realized that I think the industry as a whole in agriculture and everywhere, we're having to have that dialogue with a lot of our younger employees. Why? So and again, we talk about the the quality of life stuff, the social aspect, the community aspect of where we are, all those other things, not just what they're being paid. And then agriculture itself, we need to turn around and think, well, what are the skills we need, and where else do they come from? You don't have to go to an agriculture school like Guelph or Ridgetown or those schools to be in the field of agriculture. Agriculture is also agriculture and agri-food and industry, and it's the largest industry in Ontario. It contributes $34 billion to GDP. It's right up there with auto, but you can't eat a bumper, so we're probably the most important one in Ontario. Means a lot of jobs, and so we start looking outside of those other areas, and we let people know that their skills in power engineering, their skills in some of the trade skills, obviously, in mechanical engineering and stuff. It really applies to agriculture in a lot of ways. The human resource management skills that you learn at other schools that aren't traditionally agriculture very much apply to agriculture, and because we're managing humans more and more every day, explaining why is it important, what you're doing is important. So who has the skills? Perth County does a really good job of going to the schools with a list of all the jobs in agriculture, and brings that to the guidance counselors in the high schools. And then it's a big surprise to the guidance counselors that, hey, these are jobs in agriculture and these are the skills that you guys need. Well, we got a whole lot of kids interested in this, and again, you don't need to go to an agriculture school to be excited about working in an agriculture career. So I think it overlaps quite a bit for all of us.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Ashley?
So, as a millennial, yes, I do like to know why I'm doing what I'm doing. Just as a clarification, millennial is not just anyone younger than you. It's a specific, generation that's sort of sometime in the early 80s to the early 90s, right? Like, so there's a window. And after us, they're different. And I'm now getting into my early 30s where I'm like, oh, that other generation, right? So that's my minor point about millennials. On the agriculture point, I know at the Ontario Agricultural College, we like to say that there are 3 jobs waiting for every grad of the OAC. So there is a huge demand for everyone along the whole chain of the agri-food system. And I think it's something that we see a dwindling enrollment in traditional agricultural programs at the OAC. And some of that has to do with, I remember I was an Aggie. I was an Aggie my first year, and I remember some poor young lady sticking up her hand and saying, "What's a headland?" And the entire class laughed at her. And so what do you want to bet that woman went into agriculture, right? She was laughed out of the room for asking a very basic question about crops. And so we have to kind of change the perception of how we talk about welcoming new people to different industries that maybe don't come from those things. And the idea is that sometimes we do that in rural communities as well, right? It's like, how could you not know this thing that happened 40 years ago that I learned about from my parents based on something that they heard about from their grandparents? So we have to kind of be careful with the way we frame things. In terms of the training and automation, automation is coming, right? We think that there was data released, I think, 3 or 4 years ago that said by 2020, which is now next year, that 40% of the Canadian labor force was going to be replaced by automation. And these are things that, from long-range trucking all the way through to livestock management, because frankly, robots are better at handling animals than people are. They're more consistent, they don't get in a bad mood, they're always there at the same time. Animals like them, right? So the question with that then becomes, how do we develop the new wave of the labor force, or reskill our labor force in a way that they can be smarter than robots, right? Because anything that you can do that can be done by a machine will be done by a machine. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's more effective in a lot of ways. So what do you add as a human being to that process, right? You think, you problem solve, you're able to ask questions. The challenge with training people now, and I would agree that we're doing a good job of training people for jobs that exist now or existed 10 years ago, we're not doing a great job of skilling people up for the kinds of jobs that we don't even know exist yet, right? And a lot of that has to do with training critical thinkers, people that are problem solvers, people that are able to look at a question and ask, why are we doing this? And so, while it's easy to kind of say, you know, you're making enough money, I don't pay you to ask why, that's not enough for the kind of problems that we're facing. We know that we're within a 12-year window of the Earth kind of falling in on itself and blowing up on fire. And we live in, it's optimistic. Thanks for bringing me, Jess. But this means that we have a very narrow window to address some serious problems, and they require serious thinking and really strong skills. And if we're not thinking about the kind of skills we need to address those problems, we're all kind of in the sinker. When it comes to automation training in the next wave, we need the infrastructure, right? So it was just announced that Ontario students are going to have to take 4 e-credits through the course of their high school education. If you live in a rural area, and here in Saugeen Shores, you need connectivity to do that. Whether that's retraining as an adult second in your career, whether that's training as a young person, if that's access to education outside of your community through connections to remote education for your degree, you need the infrastructure in place. And so in terms of what that means for how we look at investments, it means that broadband is no longer a nice to have, it's critical core infrastructure. It means we have to start funding it and looking at it as infrastructure, not things that go for schools, hospitals, and one community separately. And that's how we kind of look at the future. But I would really encourage us to think about those areas where if you can have a machine that can do a weld, what's your welder going to do? What kind of high skill issues, what kind of high skill problems is that person going to tackle in the future? It's probably going to be quality control to make sure that a pipeline doesn't leak. You need people to be able to do that. So think further down the line on who's graduating in the next 4 years. Think about what are they going to do when they're in their 40s.
And just to add to that, I would concur that we're getting better at preparing people for the labor force, and it gets even better through collaboration. It's through those experiences of working with the schools and working with existing programs, whether it's informal or formal education. And within our program, within the College of Agriculture and the Rural Planning Program, we have 35 students that join us every year that want to do their master's in planning for small towns. And we have the greatest curse that within the first year of their program, almost half of them have full-time job opportunities. The trick, though, is those job opportunities come to them, and even though they want to maybe live in a certain region, they maybe want to come to the Saugeen Shore, but the question is, how do you tap into that audience sooner than somebody else? Because they're excited, they've got energy, and it's great opportunities. The other opportunity around training is to bring some of the issues that communities are grappling with or haven't figured yet how to overcome, and allow people to start working on them in conjunction or in cooperation with you. So whether it's an issue around immigration, an issue around transit or housing or active transportation, there might be people within the colleges, the universities, that would actually love to tackle that as a topic and work with communities to figure out opportunities or ways of moving forward. Those students then become engaged and embedded within your community, and when job opportunities become available, they're incredibly likely to want to stay in that region. But I'll offer two stories, one of caution and one of optimism. One is a recent workshop we were doing with young people that were doing local training that was provided through a variety of collaborations, and it worked really well, but all of those young people left. And everybody was shocked. They got new skills, they had this great innovative system to get people skills, their employers were helping them with time off during the day, and they left. And when we asked people why they were leaving, they said, well, young people in our community are viewed as failure if you stay. Young people, when you graduate high school, if you've got good academic grades, you go off and you pursue post-secondary. If you are good at skills, you go out and you find a job in another community. But if you stay in your community, you're actually seen and labeled as a failure. So even if you want to be in that community, because you've not left, others view you in a different light. And people said, I don't want to be viewed in that light. That comes as baggage for me to stay here and have a livelihood. And so they actively chose to leave their communities, often moving 50 kilometers away, doing jobs that their community has in demand, but because the perception of them as not leaving, they weren't smart enough, they didn't have money to travel, or they didn't have the skills to find other jobs, that community, or they perceived that community to label them as failures. And they didn't want that. And there was no intention by the community to label them as such, but that was just how the perception was being raised. And that's something we need to address as we start to look forward around young people in training. And the second one is maybe an illustration of optimism. It comes out of the Kootenays region of British Columbia, and it's called MIDAS. And I cannot remember what the acronym stands for. But this is a region that was historically mining community, and all of those jobs are now being done by robots. They don't need people to dig iron out of the ground and put it into a cart. There's a machine that does that. And so they had to think about how to use technology, how to use this innovation that's coming around. And so they partnered with the high school, they partnered with the business community, they partnered with different levels of government, and they created a think tank exploratory laboratory setting where young people get to come in and they get to play with new technology. They get to create 3D printers. They're using and learning about different metals. They're using new equipment and laser cutters, and they're making all sorts of widgets. And it was to get young people involved in these industries, because a lot of the times the young people were saying, well, we hear about technology, we hear about these opportunities, but I don't know what it really means or how it would be meaningful to my community. So through this initiative, they've now sponsored new jobs, new businesses have been created. They're now one of the leading technology centers and thinking centers around how to use new technology in the mining industry. And all of this came around because of a partnership of people trying to just figure out how to fill the labor force, but also figuring out what are people going to do in 10 years in this industry? And how do we get people starting to think about that, experiment with it? Some people figure it's for them, and others think, oh, this is not my cup of tea, I'm going to do something else. But it allows people to experiment, it allows people to break out of the molds of doing what we've always done and wanting to continue doing that. So I think there's a long way to go, but it's exciting.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. The next part is around automation, and we've touched a little bit about automation in our discussion currently, but unfortunately automation is often seen as taking away jobs from humans, and that's something I hear all the time when I'm working with communities, when in fact sometimes those automated tools might be keeping the business, actually keeping it open. So as a panel, sort of, if you can enlighten us with some experience or your perspective on what automation is what it looks like in supporting local business. And Ryan, I'll start with you this time.
Sure, yeah. You're right, automation is always seen as the devil. Often, it's going to cost lots of jobs, and the reality is it sometimes does, but it all depends on your industry. So some industries have a bigger impact than others. But one of the things to think about around this is, one is precariousness that evolves out of automation. So often we see new things being done through technology, and that creates new positions. But sometimes those new positions are incredibly precarious around how they come about. So thinking about the Innisfil around Uber transportation, the data is one concern, but the other is it creates new jobs, but those aren't full-time jobs. They're part-time jobs. They're there when someone presses the button on their smartphone to call for the taxi or the Uber, but they're not a consistent 8 to 4. They're not a guaranteed income. And so we have to think around automation and what does that mean for precariousness? This notion that you may not have a pension, you may not have full-time work, and for some people, that's exactly what they're looking for. They want something that fits that. But for others, that's not what they're looking for. So I think we need to think about automation around the notion of how does it implicate with the precariousness, but the other is around job creation. And I think of northern Saskatchewan and the potash mines that used to involve a large number of predominantly males to extract potash from the ground. It's now being done through automation, but it all of a sudden created a whole new series of jobs around how to control the robots, how to program the robots, for the IT technology positions that were created because all of a sudden we've got this new opportunity, but the robots can't just run themselves. Someone has to actually give them programming, and those robots do quit or they fail, they need to be repaired, and so it creates a whole new set of jobs, but it comes back to that notion around training. And are we giving people the right skills to ensure that they can find their place within this new world around automation and creative destruction and all of those factors? So,
Ashley?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of a tendency with most technology that, you know, when all you have is a hammer, like everything looks like a nail, right? Like that's a really used thing is like the robots will fix it or a tech solution will do this. And you still need people to address those problems. So exactly what happens when a robot doesn't do what it's supposed to do, and what happens when we have algorithms that are based on a particular mechanism or a particular way of recognizing the world don't actually perform the way we think they're going to perform. So the quote-unquote threat of automation is sort of what we do with it and what we allow to happen with automation, whether it's being used in the right way, whether we're using that hammer in the correct implementation. The interesting part about automation, particularly in heavy industry or in agriculture, is it actually has allowed more women to enter predominantly historically male-dominated professions, but that we kind of thought of as being needing a lot of muscle, needing a lot of physical stamina, which is a whole other gendered thing that I don't want to get into this morning. But it has actually created fewer barriers to entry. It's also meant that in some of our more labor-intensive ag production, so I'll let Peter talk to this a little bit more, but things like dairy, having a robotic milker, or having a robotic dairy operation means that those people are now no longer completely tied to the farm operation for the entire day. They can be more involved in the community. They often are engaged in off-farm labor. They're more engaged in the labor force in different ways, and they're contributing in alternative ways to the community and to economic development. So it creates different opportunities. I think the notion of the robots stealing our jobs is a little bit like Skynet is coming, Terminator is happening. But everybody in this room, I guarantee you, uses their cruise control, right? So we have to start thinking about this around how are we going to work with these tools and how are we going to skill people. And a lot of that is like the reduction of barriers. So if we're talking about the reduction of barriers to entry in the workforce, reduction of barriers into education, and we can use automation in those kinds of ways, we also need to think about the costs that go along with that. So if it's greater precarious employment, things like tying benefits to the person rather than to the job become very important. The strategies that complement automation become very critical to how you support that kind of economic development, as well as kind of the education related around that. So interestingly to note, today is actually a Canada-wide student strike related to things ranging from automation to tuition fees to graduating without any hope of getting meaningful employment. And this is a generation that has grown up as digital natives. These are people that have known this reality is coming for their entire lives. This is something we've talked about since they were children. So if those young people are kind of looking at this with a sense of hopelessness, because in large respects, folks that have made decisions about this, the most sophisticated piece of technology that we've been using is a flip phone, we need to kind of think about the decision-making mechanisms that are going along with automation. I don't think we're ready for the wave that's coming. Just as I'm spreading doom and gloom wherever I go this morning, but I think that we're going to have to get ready really, really quickly. We have a generation of people that are skilled in using those things, but they've always had technology that worked. These are digital natives that have had personal computers or cell phones or things that they've worked with that have always worked. They've never had to get into the nitty-gritty of replacing the internal guts of a computer the same way that you would have 10 or 15 years ago. So the skills that go along with that are also ones that we need to be looking for in developing our own labor force.
Thanks, Ashley. Pat?
So agriculture is, again, not unique to a lot of these issues around automation. Obviously, interesting that you brought up the gender issues. Certainly, it would take a lot to feed 2,500 pigs at once. You know, it's tough. It's strength kind of work, but it's now become a thing of the past. I can press a button, feed all those animals at once, and then focus on the health and care of animals. So automation has done a lot for agriculture, and it's definitely brought down barriers to entry into the field. In agriculture, I find now that what we need is operators, the training for operators. So I just want to know that somebody's willing to learn or capable of learning, and then you come into an exciting career in agriculture, and you can operate equipment. A tractor is basically just it's an Xbox, really. You're just sitting in it now.
Very expensive.
Very expensive Xbox. But I've been into the schools and had a chance to talk to a lot of the younger kids in the schools here about agriculture, and I tell them that, and they are like, "Oh," and I'll have my iPad here, and I explain, "Well, I can play Fortnite in my tractor. What do you think about that?" They find that pretty interesting. So. Yeah, I can watch a Leaf game if I really wanted to, but the point is that you can do a lot of the really interesting things that you want to do and be productive and get paid for it, right? But again, the pay thing is we're really talking about why to these kids. So they can enter a workforce that has automation that they can really be a part of, and they can adapt. They're adapting to technology at an unbelievable pace. We all know that. We all try to. But yeah, I sit in a tractor now. It's a $500,000 tractor, and it's just operated by a computer. So these kids don't know that. I think one of the things that we really need to do is show that. Automation is providing a lot of jobs. The repair industry for these tractors now is almost entirely automated in itself, in that there's just computer modules that you just pull out of a tractor and put a new one in. Somebody needs to know how to do that. That wasn't a job when somebody came out of high school 20 years ago. 25 years ago, it was diesel mechanic. How can you pull apart an engine and put it back together? Now it's how can you pull apart this little computer module and get that tractor going again. So the automation is creating, I believe, a great workforce, but we need to probably do a little bit better job of explaining that to our new millennials and the people that are coming beyond, after them.
Thanks, Pat. Gemma.
Yes, so I think that this is what we need, actually. I know that we talk about it taking away jobs, but I think when we talk about numbers and we talk about across Canada, let's not even think globally. Across Canada, we just don't have people. And we're moving people around. We're taking people from one community to another, creates a gap in that community. So we need to start thinking about automation, technology, and all of those AI pieces that allows us to do the work that we do it well, with less people. We need to start thinking about that. And so we're talking about robots, but I'm thinking of my office and how do I use technology to not automate, but make work that doesn't need a human touch to get that done in a click of a button. So in our office, if we need forms to fill out, how quickly can we get that form filled out and printed and given to the person who needs to sign it? And so when we talk about that, the only thing I will not change around automation is answering the phone. I do not like to get a machine that says, if you know the extension number, but I have to listen to 10 minutes of information before I get to that person. That's the one piece I haven't changed in the office, because I really like somebody to pick up the phone and get me or get you to where you need to be quickly. So that's the piece of automation that isn't going to happen in our office. But I really think that this is the way we need to explore for businesses how we're going to do the job, and particularly service-bound, like, healthcare in our office, in other services. How do you do that piece of your job well with technology? And I believe I was in Kingston, somewhere around there, and I was in a restaurant and we ordered on an iPad. We just looked at all the stuff we wanted. We click, click, click. It went right to the the kitchen, and it came out very, very quickly. How are we using technology to enhance the services that we provide? And I think this is a good thing for the labor market. I'm scared that we will not be able to meet all of the human needs. So how do we start talking to businesses about introducing technology? What's the technology that will help you do your job better? And it removes some of that human error in the pieces that you can. You know, if somebody takes a receipt and they have to type in a number and then they type in the number twice, but they type it in differently twice, then your math is off. If you've got one button that you can press that gets everything working, you're saving time, and you're having quality control as well. So I think that AI, automation, and technology will certainly help us create the workforce that we need moving forward. And I think most people are willing to learn something new. And so if we give them the right training, they will be willing to do that new job or that job in a new way and still be successful and engaged in the workplace.
Okay, thank you, panel. So we've talked about automation. Now I want you to sort of think about, there's still a lot of jobs out there that require human help. Immigration programs like the Foreign Worker Program have been known to support local businesses in other parts of our country. So I want you to think about this question. How does a community or region know when they are ready to look to immigration programs? And we've heard a lot about that lately with the influx of newcomers coming to our areas. So just your thoughts around that. Gemma, do you want to start?
Sure. Lots of thoughts around that. Actually, good thoughts. So I moved from Trinidad to Canada, but then I moved to Bruce County. And people often ask me, how did I get to Teeswater? And most of you should know where Teeswater is. Mm-hmm. Well, how did I get to Teeswater? Well, you can blame my husband. We didn't know it existed. We moved because we wanted a different lifestyle. And we've always, because we come from a small island, from Trinidad and Tobago, we always wanted to live in a rural community. So my husband literally pointed at the map, and there we ended up in Teeswater. So I had a staff person drive me home there, then he goes, oh my gosh, you really do live way out here. but you know what happened though? When we decided to move to Teeswater, we thought, okay, we have to integrate ourselves into the community. We went over and we talked to our neighbor, and I'll tell you, I used the term street and I was laughed at, but it was okay, I stayed, I can take it. So I said, oh, across the street, and they said, no, this is a road. Okay, first learning, and then they did call us city slickers. But anyway, that community though, it's a small, like farmers around us, we live in the farm community, and what they said to us was incredible, and I think this is important moving forward. They said to us, you are now a part of this community, we volunteer at the Belmont Maple Syrup Festival every April, what do you want to do? Not how would you like to engage, not if you think you want, call me back, it was what do you want to do? Here's the schedule, here are all the things that we do, choose your job. And we came with our 3 children, they were very young, and our oldest was 8, and ever since, we've been here 17 going on 18 years, and we have always, since that time, volunteered at the Maple Syrup Festival. Right away, we became a part of that community. And if you're looking at how you're going to integrate immigrants, and immigrants, I know people come in, but immigrants who are different, that's who we're talking about. People who are different from, like you said, Ashley, that they don't look the same, they don't act the same, they don't look for the same things. We need to think about what are the things that we can connect them to that makes them feel a part of that community immediately. And honest to goodness, when my husband and I think about if we're going to move, it's a hard decision. It is a really hard decision to think about moving from where we are. And I think that's what you want to develop in people that are moving into your community. When they're sitting down thinking, do I want to move? Don't make it an easy decision for them. Make it hard. Make them think about all the reasons why they shouldn't leave. Make them think about all the reasons why, if they left, there would be a hole left in this community. And you have to create that. Because I know that we told our neighbors that we're selling our home and we're looking to move, and it was like, why? You know, that was their first thing. Why are you moving? And then it was like, oh, we're not thinking of moving far. We're staying in the community. We had to kind of coach them through the pain. but that's kind of the relationship you want when people move to the community. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this, you can tell, is because when I look at the numbers, and the piece of paper that I have in front of me right now is talking about migration numbers, lots of people are moving into our community, lots of people are moving out of our community. We need to stem the outflow. We need to make sure that people are so entrenched in what we do here and how we include them in the community that they don't want to leave. And it's the message that I want to be able to tell everybody why I stay here. Now, I recently had, and we talked about how do we engage people. My brother moved about 8 or 9 years ago, and he stayed in the area because we brought him out. He would never have moved to the rural community had he not had the introduction through us. But recently, I was on TVO talking about rural communities and rural Canada and that whole immigration piece, and someone viewed it from South Africa. And they messaged me to say, is there a way that you can help me migrate to Canada? These are my skills. I really want to come. I don't know how to do that, but I can tell you who can. And I did refer them to someone who is an immigration consultant, a qualified immigration consultant. So those stories that people tell about the communities that they move to can help be that pull for people to move to the community. Because I can promise you, when my brother landed in Toronto, he got a bag, and all it talked about was Toronto. It talked about the GTA. And because I said, can I look at your bag that you got? And everything, nothing talked about Bruce Grey here in Perth, any other rural community. It was all about the GTA. How do we get in the bag? How do we reach the people that are thinking about coming to Canada? It takes about 4 years when somebody applies as through the economic stream. How do we use those 4 years to tell them about us, to get them here, and then keep them here? How do we get them on Highway 6 and go, this is where I intended to be before I even landed, right?
Thanks, Gemma. Pat.
Gemma, that's a really good story to hear. Not unlike my parents. They came from the Netherlands about 45 years ago. So I had to call my mother yesterday. She was so happy that I called her. And but I wanted to talk to her about her experience and my mom and dad's, and they understood more than anybody else that my first language isn't English. It's Dutch. I didn't know English until I was in 5 years old. I barely know English now. Some people might say. So, and it was the same idea of acceptance and the community-minded spirit that people have in rural Ontario. It's moving into your home for the first time and a total stranger bringing you a pie, right? Rural Ontario's been very good at that in the past, but everyone's always a little hesitant to change as well, right? And I think that's pretty clear, and I'm sure there's more studies to show that. Agriculture was a pretty big driver of new immigrants to Canada about 45 years ago in the 70s. There was a need then, there's a need now. There are really good paying jobs now in agriculture. There were then as well, but it seems like there's a lot more barriers, she said, now. Then it was if you're willing to work and you could get along with everybody, you had a job. And the sponsorship programs that were in place at that time was one of the best ways to come to the country, be sponsored by another family, and you'd have a job lined up right away. So we need to make sure we can connect some of our new Canadians to those jobs better, help folks understand that those jobs are there. I guess it's pretty interesting. Mom was kept keeping it pretty simple for me. Like, well, what kind of programs did you have? What kind of things like that? And she's like, no, just some of the dialogue was hard to listen to. She said, there was a lot of discussion probably in the 90s that really irritated her. It was about tolerance and for new people and new things. And she's like, I never asked to be tolerated. I'm a human being. I don't want to be tolerated. I want to be accepted, and I think rural Ontario has always been quite good at accepting and providing that community spirit. And so there's another example of the importance of community spirit and keeping people here. And Gemma really hit the nail on the head with your own story. And I think a lot of immigrants to Canada have that same story. They want to be a part of the community. They want to do things. English as a second language programs in the area are more important probably than anything you could have, because communication, as we know, is the most important thing in any relationship. So your relationship with the new immigrants and the community through communication and making sure everybody can understand each other well. So that certainly goes a long way to help supporting the labor force. Agriculture, we're still sitting at a vacancy rate of around 7%. one of the highest, probably the highest one in Canada. And so, like I said, we have a desire to make sure we get the right people and people willing to work and come to communities and be a part of our community. So I think that's very important.
Thank you. Ashley.
So I think that's a really powerful, both those stories are very powerful evidence around the importance of your personal relationships, right? Not an immigrant from families based out of Bruce County, have long connections to this area. However, I still got a pass when they found out, oh, you're Whedon's from Paisley, when I moved up here for work. Like, I had a buy-in just because of my last name. Now imagine if your last name is not Anglo-Saxon, if your last name is something different, if you look different than me, and even though I have rainbow hair, I still manage to fit in a lot of places, that immediate tie is a little bit different. And if you don't have someone like Gemma to come, or you don't have family members to come to the area, what are the things that draw you here? How do you get here? What is the story you know if you're not in the bag, right? So this question of like, how do you know when you're ready for an immigration program, is a little bit about the best time to plant a tree, right? It was 20 years ago. So the best time to leverage an immigration program was 20 years ago. But in the absence of that, the things that are possible now are leveraging those personal connections. I guarantee you have people in your community that have moved here relatively recently from somewhere else in the world. Who are they talking to about their experience here? Are they talking to people about it? Are they connected to someone else? Are they leaving every weekend to go to Toronto where their community is? How do you bring that community to them here and encourage them to want to be here and with people that feel like home, right? And this is a really important part of that is any newcomer, no matter where they're coming from, whether they're coming from Kitchener-Waterloo, from the GTA, or from Trinidad and Tobago, is that you need to have mechanisms that help you find your people. That was crucial for me as a mid-20-something in Owen Sound, was a coworker said, we'll help you find your people. So took me out to a music festival. I met all my favorite kind of creative weirdos, and it was something that helped me build a really strong sense of community in Owen Sound. It was really important for me personally and professionally. But in the absence of those informal ties, in the absence of someone kind of shoulder tapping and saying, we'll help you find your people, we'll help you find your sense of home, you have to look at mechanisms that support that. And really interesting, some studies that are coming out around the newcomer to Canada experience in rural areas is that they often have, in communities that are ready to receive them, that are excited about that, are acknowledging the fact that we need people to fill jobs, we need people to replace the labor force, replace the sort of the community output factor, is that they feel much more integrated. They feel at home and welcome. They have a much greater success rate of finding employment and staying put and having a meaningful and sort of reporting of happiness in their experience of immigrating versus in larger urban centers where they might feel lost. They might feel disconnected from broader social systems. So that's something that you can leverage to your advantage, right? This is something that you know that you can create a welcoming place for people to live and experience their lives. I love that note about tolerance versus acceptance. We talk about that in diversity and inclusion, right? Diversity is sort of a symptom, and inclusion is the feeling that you feel when there is no barrier to actually participating. So I think that if we're just looking at sort of tolerating and saying it's going to be okay and we should have people here and you're going to be fine, that's sort of working at cross purposes from the message of saying we need you. You're a vital part of this community, and behaving in a way that lines up with that. So whether that's the welcome wagon that brings people in and it's the box of goods from your neighborhood association. I know some other communities do a really great job of creating baskets of goods here in Southampton that might look like something from Little Dog, that might look like something from Outlaw, it might look like a hat or a shirt from the Southampton store. I mean, the sweaters are pretty iconic. And having that show up your door when somebody new moves into the community, right? These are fairly low touch, very simple things that you can do that kind of say, oh, I'm already part of here. I'm going to look and feel as much as I can at home. So they're very simple, soft touches that you can do. But a lot of it's the attitude and the motivation. If it's simply, I need a body to come here and fill a job, people can tell that. You can smell that a mile away, right? You're exploiting my labor for a particular reason, rather than I'm a member of your community and contributing, whether that's volunteering or somebody that's valued. So I think in terms of being really clear about your motivations and then acting as if that's exactly what you want is really, really important part of that story.
Thank you. Ryan.
Great. Three things I'll add to the narrative that's been shared already. One is that I think we often forget that we have a robust history of welcoming new people into rural communities across this country. This country was founded on new immigrants, and it's a matter of to what degree where did they come from and when did they come from? But we've often forgot about the stories of when people moved into our communities from 20 years ago and how we got them engaged through the volunteer initiatives or whatever it might be. So we've got experience. So it's not like we're starting from square one. We have experiences. We just need to figure out how to use those experiences and move them forward. And what it really comes down to at the end of the day is collaboration. A business, if you're looking to fill labor force, has to work with other agencies within the community. They need to work with the school system and the healthcare system to get people engaged and feeling as if they're welcomed in and have a meaningful contribution to make to that community. And we've seen a variety of different strategies that have been taken throughout the country in small towns, and these are really important to learn from. And there's lots of good work happening out there. In southern Manitoba, there's a group called the Welcoming Communities Dialog Group, and it brings together the larger employers, the small employers, the school division, the education services, the nonprofit groups, the faith-based communities, and they all sit at one table and they say, this week we're anticipating 5 new arrivals are coming into the community. And the library says, great, we're going to get them a library card so that they can access the library immediately, but they also know that that library card needs to have a photo on it. What library needs a photo in a small town? But what's really important is connecting utilities. When you first arrive to the community, you may not have any other identification that is local. So they said, well, let's put a photo on them. That's easy to do. So they have these sorts of opportunities where the school division can start preparing and saying, well, that new arrival that's coming into our community, do they have children? And when might their family reunite with them so that we can start making plans with our communities to say, well, when those children come in, the school needs to know so that they can integrate them right away and have the resources available to support the learning opportunities. So there's lots of ways to do this, but we need to be collaborative. We need to be working with everybody in the community and the region to coordinate this, because the immigration system in this country is incredibly complex and it changes on a regular basis. And so we need to ensure that everybody is talking to each other, sharing information, because at the end of the day, we're all in it together. I will pass along a few notes, and I think I've shared this with Gemma before. I call it the Redcoat Fiasco. This was a community that was welcoming 25 newcomers from Mauritius, which is an island in the Pacific Ocean, into southern Manitoba. And all of the new arrivals arrived in mid-February. This is an island that on a cold day sees a rainstorm come through. They've never seen snow before, and they arrived in southern Manitoba in the middle of February. And the community brought together their Welcoming Community Dialogue Group and said, what's the biggest thing that they need? And that's good winter coats. People are going to arrive, they're going to learn about winter through Wikipedia, but they're not going to realize what this really means. And a good winter coat, as we all know, is not cheap. So the community raised money through a variety of different sources to buy all the new immigrants from Mauritius a Canada Goose down-filled winter jacket. A wonderful gift. And they bought them through a wholesaler, and they came out and they handed them out, and they're all red. The first thing that these newcomers to that community wanted to do was fit in. They wanted to integrate. They wanted to become part of the community. And all of a sudden, there are 25 redcoats that everybody in the community knows are new immigrants. And these are individuals that just wanted to fit in, and all of a sudden, they stood out. And within 2 weeks, people stopped wearing the coats because they wanted to fit in. And this was the greatest laid plan that people spent weeks and months preparing, thinking that this was going to be the greatest way to welcome people into their community, but didn't think about the outcome of it. And so it was good energy, good excitement, but just got into the wrong channel. And so a word of caution around thinking about what's welcoming for you may not necessarily be what's welcoming for people that are moving into your community. And so that brings up the question around making sure that we're having dialogue with people that are new to our community, whether they've come from Syria, whether they've come from downtown Toronto, to ensure that we understand what their opportunities are, what their challenges are, so that we don't romanticize about what we think they might need or what they think we should be providing. Another great example comes out of New Brunswick that was looking at Francophone entrepreneur succession planning, and they were attracting new business owners to come in from Belgium into rural New Brunswick. And what the community thought would be really, really good for them was to organize a series of casseroles for the first couple of weeks that new families moved into their community. It would be a nice opportunity. They're unpacking boxes. They'd have a lasagna or another casserole, and it'd be great to integrate them into the community. And this was perceived horribly by the newcomers. They had left downtown Brussels because they wanted to get out of the rat race. They wanted to be able to come home in the evening to be with their family, to have a nice, quiet, relaxed evening where nobody knew their business, and every night someone showed up on their doorstep with a casserole. And what they deemed this was a responsibility, because now they have a casserole that they don't know what to do with. It may not be appropriate for the family in terms of dietary, in terms of preference, but not only that, they now have an empty dish, and they know nobody in the community. But they feel they need to give it back, but how do you get the dish back to them? So this wonderful initiative to prepare casseroles that the community planned for, thought was going to be the biggest thing that was going to help keep people in the community, and those that were receiving them thought it was the biggest obligation and was not welcoming them at all. They had people coming to their doorstep nonstop. They had to invite them in to entertain, and they just wanted to be home alone with their family. So we've got lots of experience, we have lots of energy, we have lots of passion in our communities. The trick is how to channel it and to make sure we're having those dialogues with people that are new to our community, to make sure what we're doing is what people would like or is going to be useful or helpful at the end of the day. And the last thing I would mention around immigration into small communities is that we need to advocate for some changes. And this is a challenge that's well beyond the scope of just this neck of the woods, but our immigration policy was largely set up many years ago, and it is predominantly an urban-based immigration system. It's designed by people that are predominantly in Ottawa, and 75% of the immigrants coming into Canada arrive into what is affectionately referred to as MTV, Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. So how do we inform policymakers in Ottawa and program analysts that are going to create new programs to support communities what the reality is in our small towns, in this region of Ontario? How do we ensure that the programs that are being created don't inadvertently work against the strengths of the place and the assets of people that we have here? And we're starting to see some changes happening. We've got the new pilot initiative that's happening, but we still need to start advocating for some more changes to ensure that the programs that are out there, the policies that are there, make sense for small towns, and that policymakers in Ottawa or in Queen's Park understand the reality of doing that. And that's a huge challenge that we have, and it's something that we need to work with other regions across this province and across the country to really make sure that message gets back to policymakers so that when things don't work, we can share with them why it's not working, but also provide suggestions around how we might make changes to ensure that it works better or easier on that front. And it's not that Ottawa doesn't want to hear this or is against changes, but they just sometimes don't realize that things aren't working well in small towns and that the program they designed isn't great for what we want to use it for. So lots of opportunities there around advocating for some change to make sure it works better. We've got great welcoming community initiatives, and if you're interested, I can share lots of other resources and guides on that. But we need to make sure that we're asking people that are coming to our communities, what do they want, how can we help them, and really, really focus around collaboration and constantly ask yourself this big question around, as you're planning these new initiatives or as you're planning events, whose voice is missing from this planning process? Because often they might bring a perspective that would be incredibly useful around the long-term sustainability, the health, and the vibrancy of our communities.
Great, thank you, panel, for those.
I just wanted to add, sorry, Cheryl, that there are tools, though we didn't talk about the employers at all. And as they talk about how they're going to integrate their workforce, their immigrant workforce, into their workplaces, there are initiatives that are developing tools and toolkits for employers to use. So keep an eye on that. I know that Wellington County is developing a toolkit, so that will probably be released shortly. And so just making sure that as we're doing the community pieces, we're also doing the workforce pieces, helping the employers to keep that workforce engaged as well.
That was a nice segue, Gemma. Something that I forgot to mention was a toolkit that I worked on with a group of stakeholders in conjunction with Bruce Power and Bruce County. We put together a welcoming communities toolkit, just some basic things when newcomers are coming, not necessarily immigrants, but from other parts of Canada, other parts of the US, for example, things to think about. We also did some website reviews with municipalities on ensuring that your websites were welcoming, because that's the first place people go to look, is to the website. So we encourage them to think about things, having a tab on their website that's for new residents, listing all those things from A to Z that they need to know. So really good things to think about for being a welcoming community that you mentioned. Some basic things, but things we forget to think about. And they're really, we need to think about them because it helps them really integrate into our community. So I have one last question. So we've talked about training, we've talked about attracting a workforce, we've talked about automation, we've also talked about, how do we be welcoming, how do we bring immigrants to our community. The last piece I want you to think about is what are some other resources, groups, or networks out there that you might use, but also you might encourage communities or municipalities, whoever it might be, to think about, because you've talked about collaboration, you've talked about that regional approach. So what are some things that might come to mind when you think about that? Ryan, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, sure. So I think it goes back to that earlier comment that this is not an issue that's unique to this particular neck of the woods. Communities across the country and internationally are having these same conversations and looking at strategies. And sometimes the strategies they work on work really well, and sometimes they don't. But they've learned a lot in the process. And so for me, it's around reach out. There are a lot of organizations that are doing work that might be similar or might have relevance to this neck of the woods, whether it's down the highway and 50 miles or whether it's 5,000 miles on the west coast of Canada. There are groups out there that have a whole set of resources that they're usually quite happy to share. They're happy to have a conversation, through technology. Perhaps you can bridge them in via Skype or some other platform. So groups that I would encourage people to look at, one would be the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation. It's a national nonprofit really around how to foster sustainable and revitalized and vibrant rural economies into the new future. And they have a whole series of resources, but more importantly, a whole series of resources of people that have experiences that you can connect to. And they have an event on a regular basis where they share information, and they used to do a wonderful thing at their conference, which was tell us the thing that didn't work, the biggest failure you had over the last year. And it was a platform where people could get up and say, we tried this, and by gosh, it did not work. But here's what we learned, and if you're going to do this, make sure you're looking at these issues that didn't allow it to work here. So take a look at groups like the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation, the Rural Policy Learning Commons, the municipal associations have very strong programs as well. But more importantly, just pick up the phone. Pick up the phone and phone people that are maybe doing or addressing similar issues and find out what's happening, because they're all really useful and willing to help out. But my word of caution is that place matters. So you might find other places that have got things. Don't look at it as a cookie cutter checkbox that you can simply just adopt, change the name from Nelson, British Columbia to Saugeen Shores and start implementing, because your place matters. Your place is unique. You've got a culture, a heritage, a language, amenities that are unique to your community, and the priorities of the materials that you might use as a resource may not be the same priorities for your community or your future. So make sure that you're reaching out and being creative, but make sure to modify those resources to your place and be unapologetic in doing so, to make sure that it fits your agenda, your priorities, and what your vision of the future will look like. But don't recreate the wheel. There's no shortage of priorities that keep people busy during the day. Reach out, find out where there are other proverbial wheels, and start using them and help them to move forward on that front. So,
Ashley?
I would continue the reaching out part. As Ryan mentioned earlier, we've got upwards of 35 to 40 Masters in Rural Planning students that come in every year to our department at the School of Environmental Design and Rural Development. And a lot of them are looking for projects to work on that are related specifically to exactly the conversations we're having here today. So you're not in it alone, but not only are you not in it alone, there is a whole network of people out there that are looking to develop really evidence-based, robust solutions or questions around how to address these things. So in terms of looking towards organizations like the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation or the Rural Policy Learning Commons, my suggestion in terms of the tools and networks that we leverage as academics are widely available to you. We work at a public institution. Call either one of us anytime and we can put you in touch with someone that knows something about what you're asking about, because it's really important not to rob and deploy from other communities because you don't know what that's based on. To a large extent, there's been a huge swath of work done based on Richard Florida's creative class, which he has actually come out recently and said, shaky science, guys. So when we have massive economic development strategies throughout the entire country that are based on science that really wasn't great science, wasn't really great evidence, we need to be very careful about what that means for the replication of that strategy over time. So pausing and really thinking about that place matters. This matters to our community. What research, what evidence, what stories are we telling, and what is that based on is a really important question to ask yourself, rather than just sort of anecdata, so sort of story here, story there, story there. Come work with us. Come find a master's student or a PhD student that's fascinated by this topic and wants to help you find a solution based in your community. We're a community-engaged scholarship-based university. Our whole mandate is to do work that benefits communities, improves lives. So I really would heavily encourage you to reach out to Ryan and myself after this if there's questions that you want to talk about further around expanding this conversation. The idea of talking to each other is really important, but talk to people you don't normally talk to is the other one, right? So as a recovering public servant, I worked in municipal government for more than a decade. I know that you get kind of in a bit of an echo chamber, and you do that in business as well, where you talk to your same kind of core group of peers. And it gets really easy to kind of stew in that, like, everybody's facing the same problem, panic, 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 what do we do? Instead of kind of going out and talking to other people, saying, these are the questions we're facing, and creating that cross-pollination between health, between government, between industry, agriculture, and different sectors, right? Asking those questions from other people, because, as Peter mentioned, there are great solutions from agriculture that apply to other businesses, that would apply to the service industry. There are great solutions happening in the service industry that might apply to other industries or into government. Finally, that notion of talking to people that you don't normally talk to is this idea of getting your story outside of your community walls. Nobody can be a prophet in their own hometown. One of the most powerful things we did for the Intelligent Community Project was we got 5 minutes on CBC Ontario Morning with Whedon and immediately raised the profile of the work that we were doing. Not only outside of our community, but within our community. All of a sudden we had external legitimacy, right? We were talking to a source, we were getting that message out to other people. So this idea of trying to get outside of the bubble so that you can bring those good solutions back is really, really important.
Okay, thank you. Pat, need that mic.
And agriculture, as I mentioned earlier, has worked with labor shortages for a long time. So our industry created something called CARC, the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council, and I think it's being mirrored, and it's probably mirrored from and being mirrored across the country in other sectors as well. But basically, it's there to first of all identify some of the issues that we're here talking about today, so they know that we've got labor shortages, and then come up with solutions from within the industry. And I know they do look outside the industry to see what other solutions are as well. It's very helpful for people like us here, where I live in this community, as involved in agriculture, when I can go and speak to our lawmakers, our MPPs and our MPs about some of the programs that might be necessary to help support maintaining our workforce and bringing in new people. So it's a good lobby tool that I like to use all the time. And then beyond that, I think it also, to go a little bit further when you're talking to folks about coming here and immigrating or anything like that, you talk a lot about shared values. And I think forget that a lot of the values we share about community and things like that are shared with most people around the world and across and outside of our community. So, have that conversation, try to have an organic conversation if you can. Try to have a conversation if you can speak English. But that's true. It's really important. I talked about that earlier. It's really good to have communication and talk about shared values and why it's so important and so fun to live next to a lake. Oh my God, we have the most wonderful beach here in the world. I moved here 2 decades ago now. 2 decades ago, I can't believe it. From the Stratford area in the middle of Ontario. No beach, very kind of boring area. I enjoyed it. It was a great upbringing, but moving here, that was my draw. It's just phenomenal. The people that are here are amazing. So a lot of, again, the shared values, what attracts people to the area, and get that message out. So get that message out using the tools that you have from other organizations. Again, talk to those lawmakers, talk to our representatives that do have access to talk to even more people, and make the right decisions when it comes to regulations that would encourage it and help people come to the area and stay.
Okay, thank you. Jeppa.
To follow up on that, so Ashley talked about that evidence-informed process that you're going to do, and you talked about just being able to share the information. So that's what we do. We are able to do that local research to help you get the evidence that you need to show that there's something that needs to be done in the work around that whole workforce growth. So some of the things that we have been working on, and I'll point you to that, is so you see our local labor market plan every year. We talk about what's happening in our community around workforce. But in the next 12 months, you'll see a report coming out from us that is around the migration. We're going to do a deeper dive into migration. Who's moving here? What are the skills they're bringing? What are the qualifications and their age category? So you can really tell around developing a plan around the people that are moving here and how can you engage with them and the skills that they're bringing to engage them in the workforce. So you'll see that over the next 12 months. The other thing that we are working on is a conference in the fall, and it will be Growing Your Workforce. And we want all of you to be there. To go back to Ashley's and Pat's about talking to people outside of who you normally talk to. And that's the plan for this conference. This conference is going to be held in Strathford. It's not that boring. I have friends in Strathford. But what we want to do there is really talk about, we've been talking about the labor force shortage for a long time. The point of this conference and this forum is to talk about how we are going to grow our workforce. We need actions. We need things that we can do to make sure that we're moving forward. And we're actually inviting the entire Western region, so you're going to have lots of people to talk to outside of who you normally speak with, and all of the service providers that will help us in this task of growing the labor force. So we will have immigration, we will have Employment Ontario service providers, housing. We want everyone there talking about what are the things we need to have in place to make sure we can grow our workforce. So we want to invite you there. Keep around late October open. We're just starting the planning stages for that. But what will come out of that is an action plan that will be developed that communities can take back to their own communities and say, okay, how are we going to action these items within this? So it's going to be a broader strategy for Western Region, but we want you to be able to be connected with it to say, how can we make this happen? There are things here that we can make happen. And so let us help you get that evidence you need to help us grow that workforce, because I think that's pretty key. And just keeping that evidence-informed pieces, when you want information about workforce development, come to us. But not just us. We have recognized lots of great work happening in Bruce and Grey counties with the service providers, Employment Ontario service providers, making sure that we are having those large job fairs that help the employers get their messages out, but we also have the Newcomer Centre of Peel bringing busloads of people with great skills to our community. How do we make them decide that they're going to stay here? All of those pieces we have happening, how do we coordinate them to make sure that it's sticky? Right now we're doing a lot of work. We may not be seeing a lot of the outcomes. Let's work on those outcome pieces. What do we need to do to make sure that that's sticky around getting people to stay here? And that's our biggest goal. It's making sure that we can grow this workforce and the population to sustain the economic vibrancy that we have here in Bruce, Grey, Huron, and Perth counties.
Thank you. And I just want to express my thanks to the panel today for answering the questions that we had asked you, and your insight and your comments, your examples, resources to send people to. We so appreciate that, and we just thank you for your time that you were here and able to share. We will be opening the floor now for questions from the audience, but I just wanted to express my thanks to the panel before we do that. So join me in thanking the panel, please. So we have about 15 minutes or so for questions from the audience. So if you would like to ask the panel any questions, maybe there's something you need clarified, something they said, or you have a further question about that, we'll open the floor to questions now.
We can hear you.
I'm Cheryl Grace. I'm a counselor in Saugeen Shores, and I was interested in Pat's comment about ESL. My daughter is an experienced ESL teacher. She's looking for more permanent work in the school system, but in the meantime, she's a volunteer. And the ESL program in Saugeen Shores is manned by volunteers. It's organized by a young mom whose husband works at Bruce Power. She basically pays for rental time at the library as a space. She provides, food for sort of organizing the teachers and that kind of thing. But we really need to have something that's more structured for individuals who, in some cases, I know I was talking to Marcel Legault, who runs Harvey's in Port Elgin, and he has a number of wonderful workers who are from Cuba, whose husbands work at Bruce Power, and they're great workers, but they need language support. And so I think if there's some way that we can have a more structured government support for ESL programs. Just one other thing on this. My daughter Lindsay worked with a couple from Africa. She was tutoring them. They ended up leaving, going to Kitchener because they couldn't get enough food that they wanted here. And so if we can somehow encourage more exotic foods in our grocery stores or something, I don't know if the word exotic is correct, but foods that would make them feel more welcome. It's supporting the points you made about, making people feel more comfortable. Thanks.
Yeah, Cheryl, you make a great point. Making people feel more comfortable, helping them feel more comfortable where they are, being a part of the community. And yes, English as a second language, so important. There's so many. I don't know if I need to explain why it's so important, but I mean, just to go out and get your driver's license, you're gonna have to you have to know English. You have to be able to read it, and that's important. Why not? So, connecting. It's also an opportunity to connect people with the community as well. When you have a local focus right in their community, so people are talking to each other, meeting other people. The food part, I don't know, there is no Dutch cuisine really, so there's, I don't know, unless you like frikandel, yeah, stroopwafels. But you're right, there's a connection, and it makes people feel a lot more comfortable when they can feel like they're in a familiar setting somewhat. But yeah, absolutely, it would be great to have something permanent in this community for English as a second language, absolutely.
If I can speak to that. So you talked about a more government-supported role for that ESL, and so what we need to do is that evidence. The government funds things that are based on evidence. If we can't prove that we have a certain number, critical mass, of people that require English as a second language, they will not fund it. And I know that there's some work going on across Bruce and Grey County to set up settlement services. There is an application that went in, Cheryl, that day, yes, a couple weeks ago, February 8th, I think it was. There was, March 8th, sorry. There was an application that went in for settlement services across Bruce and Grey counties. How successful they will be, I'm not sure, but then you will see, if that is successful, then you will see some settlement services around that ESL piece. But certainly that critical mass piece, the numbers, the evidence that shows we have a critical mass to provide those services is what kind of holds us back as a community. So if we can do work around collaboration, so Bruce Grey here in Perth, if we can do a more wider group, we can maybe create that critical mass that provides the service that we need locally. So we're back to collaboration again, outside of our own communities, to be able to get the services we need.
The other piece I'd add to that goes back to the advocacy, is that often Ottawa forgets that distance and density matter in rural places. They say you need to have 10,000 second language learners in English to justify a federal support program. Well, 10,000 people might in this region mean that you're driving 2 hours. And if there's a lack of available transit, or the transit is available but only operates in certain hours and it's being led by volunteers that might do it in the evening but there's no transit, we have to be able to use the evidence to convey to Ottawa or to Queen's Park why these initiatives that are good meaning don't really work well in our smaller communities. And then we need to be creative, and one of the great examples of this from southern Manitoba that I'm aware of was the library. They have a bibliobus at the Francophone Library that goes out to communities, and what they discovered was that the van always had an extra seat in it. These darn vans had an extra seat, and they actually were taking out volunteers that were going to deliver English language instruction to new residents that were coming in. They were getting books through the library, through the mobile library, and it just provided an opportunity to kind of dovetail one resource that the community already had and start building it and bridging it into another resource that they were able to find more ways to broaden the reach of their programs. But it takes some creativity, and there's a lot of barriers, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I think it brings up one more thing, and Ashley might be able to speak to it too, the need for rural broadband. I mean, I know I've tried to learn to play guitar online. It's not easy, but this is also an avenue where you could provide ESL, and it's just broadband in this community and all of rural Canada really is entirely inaccessible because it's unaffordable in most places, and it's just not fast enough. And I think it's a good avenue to provide that service.
Yeah, so just to put some, as we're talking about evidence around that, Southwestern Ontario alone, so the area from roughly Windsor to Orillia, Goderich over to Caledon, and a bit of Niagara region as well, that area alone faces an over $4 billion deficit when it comes to fiber optic infrastructure. So that's not nationally, that's not provincially, that's just one very small corner of an actually already well-serviced and well-connected part of Canada. So the infrastructure deficit, when we're talking about infrastructure that enables everything from how we learn to how we connect with each other, addressing issues of social isolation, addressing issues of health delivery, all of the metrics around what makes a healthy, sustainable community, that infrastructure isn't there. There's budget yesterday, I've yet to dig into the details a little bit more, is really looking at a wide variety of implementation tools around how we address that. But the thing is that wireless service and 5G really won't do anything if you don't have fiber in the ground to connect those towers. And so in terms of the services that we need to underlay these things, not only are they not there, the strategies that we're developing to address them are subpar at best and dangerous at worst. Effectively, we're going to lock rural Canada into 50 down and 10 up when most of our competitors around the world are closing in on 2 to 5 gig simultaneous up and down. This is hugely problematic when it comes to competing for people to locate to your community, to competing for having businesses here, to having the critical mass to be able to deliver services like ESL, keeping rural schools open, keeping rural hospitals open. There is nothing that this issue doesn't touch. The other aspect of that is the importance of maintaining local governance and local input and say over what happens to those local resources like schools, libraries, and hospitals. It's very, very important that you look at public infrastructure as a community infrastructure, right? And I think that's something we do very well as local governments. However, we need to get more creative than thinking about funding formulas for these things as butts and seats, right? Right now, it's a bit of a head tax. However many students are in a class, that's what gets funded. However many people are coming through the door, that's what gets funded. And when we focus solely on efficiency, economic efficiency as the measure, we lose the idea that libraries are more important hubs than just how many people are coming through the door to get a book. They're people that are coming in to access services around how do I navigate the community. They're a touch point for people in terms of getting together with each other. They're often de facto daycare for a lot of places, right? Where you can come in and kind of manage your children as a whole. I know I have a lot of girlfriends that do that. They're also really important relationships to education. And we can get really creative and go back to sort of our rural roots, not to get too nostalgic about it, but the importance of schools as community hubs for delivering that. It may still be delivered on a volunteer basis, but the opportunities of, if you get kids involved in these kinds of learning processes, whether it's English or technology or any of these kind of skills that we're talking about, they take those skills home, right? They bring those skills home to their parents, and they diffuse it throughout the community that way. And they also provide a link to bring those parents in the door to learn those skills. So I think we really need to look at those conduits as well around the social factors around it.
We're going to take a break in about 5 minutes, so I'm just going to get a few more questions and we'll just fire through questions if that works with you guys.
Hi, I've got some great news for you. There actually is a Dutch restaurant in Clinton. So. Actually, mine's just a quick statement about something that you can do in rural communities if you use the organizations locally to their best effect. My name is John Montmarquette, and I'm an associate dean with Fanshawe College. And as many of you know, we operate programs through distance learning and work with employers throughout this region. Most happy recently about our partnership with Local 2222, a carpenters union which will be opening in Kincardine fairly soon. Just this past September, we had a request from a fairly large resort in Grand Bend to help us with their issues around worker shortages, to put it bluntly. They have about 300 employees, but they're currently short 50. And they're noticing all the way around their region that many restaurants are closing or in danger of closing because of the lack of support. So they talked to us, and it's taken us about maybe 6 to 8 months to work this through. And before we make a formal announcement about this, we're hoping to have everything signed off by April. But effectively, what Fanshawe will be doing is opening a location at that particular resort. 12 international students, we have space for 12 international students in our first cohort, and 2 local students in that group. And those students will be taking a 2-year program in culinary skills, followed by a program in culinary management. There's also been the possibility through our school in London, possibly looking at other programs if they prove successful, such as food and beverage. The reason that we're able to do this is that the resort came to us. We worked out the arrangements. The students will live on the resort in their first year. They will work on the resort part-time. They will probably work at the resort or someplace in the immediate community for the summer months. And they come with a 3-year work visa. Now, one of the problems that we often have when we're talking about immigration from the GTA is that when students are coming to places like the GTA or to London directly, they don't necessarily integrate with rural Ontario, and that's not the first place they see. But what rural Ontario actually has, which many of these locations do not have, is a ready source and supply of work, which is what they want, and they want to settle. And to be honest with you, when we talk to our international department, which is very good, and by the way, Fanshawe brings in thousands of international students a year, not only to London, but to other rural locations like Woodstock, St. Thomas, and or urban city centers in rural, or considered more rural areas like Woodstock, St. Thomas, and Simcoe. They don't see London like a big city. Some of these students come from cities where, you know, like 3 or 4 million people is like live. Okay? So the point of it is, they want to come to a new experience. They want to see what Canada's like. They want to be able to enjoy themselves when they come here. And one of the pieces that we want to work with the county, and this is the important part, with the county and the community, is show them as much as they can of Huron County, but also show them as much as we can of what it is like to live in Huron County, and there are other jobs and other opportunities beyond this particular resort. So just to let you know that these things do exist and they're possible. We're always talking to the county, and Bruce County and Huron County, and as we have these things come up, we're certainly willing to pass them on.
I'm going back to school. Live in a resort.
Jessica, as we get the next question, go ahead. But just as an aside, we also need to work, and I think this is where huge collaboration can come in with the colleges, bringing in international students, is lobbying and certainly advocating for how do we turn an international student into a permanent resident. That's the key factor. Once they're trained and once they have the skills that employers need, they have the workplace experience, the Canadian workplace experience, how do we turn that into now a permanent resident that grows that workforce? Great initiative, by the way.
And a lot of possibilities for growth.
Hi, my name is Marcel Joe. I've been in business in Saugeen Shores for about 15 years. I'd just like to thank the panel and the town of Saugeen Shores for 3 months, and I find it very informative. At the risk of sounding pale, and stale, one of the things I've noticed about the workforce is the work ethic has kind of shifted. So sometimes it's a challenge finding the right people, not just a body. Have you noticed that trend, or is it just my age?
I will let Gemma talk in a second. So there's a couple of things at play. It's difficult to have a work ethic if you don't have benefits, if you don't have a pension, if you don't have stability, if your job is precarious, you don't have a housing option, and you can't get to your job, right? What are the factors that are encouraging me to be excited about work in that situation, right? It feels very exploitative. The other factor around that is that every person that I've come into contact through research, through my own personal network, through the work I used to do at the county, wants to work very hard. So I think I would challenge that in the case that a lot of young people are holding down multiple side jobs. They're doing personal work on the side, so they might have that job as well as 2 other jobs. And when you don't have enough flexibility to balance those things, it can show up as something that looks like poor work ethic when it's really like, I'm cobbling together 3 different streams of income to try and pay my rent. And a lot of that has to do with the increasing, as Ryan mentioned, the increasing precariousness of labor. Right? The cost of living and inflation have gone up tremendously, so to the point where I know when my dad graduated from engineering at University of Guelph in 1971, his first year salary would reasonably cover his student debt. That is so far off from reality now that you have people graduating with, even in Canada where we have a really strong publicly subsidized education system, still graduating with 30, 40, 50, sometimes $80,000 in student debt. Show me a first-year entry-level job or service industry job that pays you $80,000 in your first year. Impossible, right? Couple that with the living expenses, which we often say in rural areas are much more affordable. We've learned today that that's maybe a myth, and the difficulties of managing all those expectations, right? So I would challenge the narrative around, I know it's your experience of working with people, the work ethic, is to challenge the expectations that you have for people around giving the environment that you're employing them in, right? What does that look like? Do they match up? Are we expecting people to come and give their all for a minimum wage job with few things attached to it and few benefits and securities attached to it, and then wondering why they might leave when something slightly better comes up, or whether they decide, is this really worth it? We see a lot of young parents struggling with the idea that maybe it's not cost effective for both people to be in the labor force. It's cheaper for me to quit my job and go home and raise children because the cost of daycare is insane. And in a lot of cases, that gets misconstrued as laziness. My experience is that every student, every employee that I've ever worked with, laziness is often something that we use to mask other problems. There might be harassment in the workplace, there might be other stressors in that person's life, there might be contextual stressors that are going on around housing or insecurity in the job. It usually is a mask for something else. So I just, in terms of the narrative that we get that young people are lazy, that people are not entering the workforce to do a good job, they want to know why do they want to know why so much? You know, these are important questions that we can't kind of put off to the side. In a similar vein, I heard a major employer in another region say that we put up all these notices about training, we put them up on all the note boards, all the bulletin boards in our office, up throughout the factory, but we would have got more uptake if we'd texted it to them, because all these young people are just on their phone. And my response was, well, why didn't you text it to them, right? So you can't, in some regards, you can't have it both ways. We have to have this narrative of, we know that people want to work. We've heard throughout today that people want to work. We have an incredibly low unemployment rate. We have a high participation rate. People are looking for jobs. And then the other side being that they don't really want to work, right? I think in some regards we have to pick which narrative we're going to use when we're talking about this. And a lot of that, I know Gemma has a lot more data around maybe the skills that we're giving people, that they aren't equipped to show up in a way that looks like a good work ethic, that we can do a better job around supporting young people or reskilling people to have those skills, because they're no longer soft skills, they're just skills, they're what you need to be employed. So I think that has less to do with innate qualities and how we're preparing people to enter the labor force, and then how we're talking about them once they're in the labor force.
So ditto what Ashley said, but you know, so the work that we do around the Employer One survey, this is our 5th year, and we are hearing work ethic, and those soft, now becoming foundational must-have skills. And so that's why we decided to do the employee survey this past year, because we knew that there was a perspective we were missing. And it's really trying to now connect those two perspectives, where an employer might be, and I say perceptions, because an employer might perceive someone's laziness as someone who has struggles to get to work. We actually deliver a program for hospitality and tourism across Bruce and Grey counties, and we are finishing up in March. But that we were working with people who are on Ontario Works, who have multiple barriers to the workforce. And while we were able to give them skills that employers are saying, they're calling us every day to say, do you have more people in the pipeline? We're also seeing those same people really turning away jobs because they have so many other things that they have to work with. And so I think this is a conversation, it's an opportunity for a conversation, which we're going to be having next year in our fiscal year, around finding out more about those perceptions in the workplace, because we need to clarify that. I don't know that people are as lazy as we think they are, but I do know that people have struggles to meeting those employment goals and needs by the employers. So it's bringing those two perspectives together and really forming that, where's the gap and how do we close that gap?
You know, just add maybe one of the other pieces of this is that if there are critical skills that are missing, whether it's new technology, it's an opportunity to let folks like Vanja, colleges, universities to know that, so that they can make sure that those skills get integrated into those education opportunities, because sometimes education institutions aren't aware of what the new reality means for business owners. And so if there's a particular skill set or way of thinking or systems of thinking that would be useful, I would encourage everyone to convey those onwards, because there's lots of opportunities to ensure that people that are being trained at the moment come out with the right skill set.
Thank you for your questions and your comments. And the panel is still here, so we're taking a break until 11:30. But please come back at 11:30. But there will be 2 updates, one from the town of Saugeen Shores and one from Bruce Power. So please come back. Oh, sorry, Bruce County. Sorry. My brain was somewhere else. I apologize. So do please come back. So we'll take a break till 11:30. There's still food, coffee, and tea out there. Thank you.
Well done, guys.
First of all, I do want to say thanks again to the panel. I know Ryan had to sneak out. He's got to teach this afternoon, so he was hitting the road fast. But thanks to Gemma, Ashley, Pat, and of course Ryan too. I hope that you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. So we have 2 additional updates. First, I'd like to introduce Matt Mead from Bruce County. He's going to bring us an update on behalf of the county. Thanks, Matt.
Great, thanks very much, Jessica. I'm really enjoyed the panel, and thanks very much for organizing today and for inviting me to speak today about the Nuclear Innovation Institute, particularly the Trades and Skilled Workforce Secretariat. And so I totally agree. I really enjoyed the panel, and I love coming to these things and giving talks because you always learn something. And today the most shocking thing that I learned is that I married a millennial. Where's Ashley? Is she still here? But I have to thank you as well, because you put my mind at ease. As I was leaving to come here this morning, my wife, the millennial, had asked me all these why questions. Why are the kids not dressed? Why are you wearing that shirt? Why didn't you pick up your clothes? And you've really put my mind at ease that it's not me. It has nothing to do with me, so thank you very much. I want to talk a little bit about the Nuclear Innovation Institute, particularly the Secretariat. It kind of fits well with what we've been talking about today. And the other thing I learned, and maybe Jessica and I can workshop this a little bit, is that you need that pitch, that couple sentences. So Saugeen Shores is the fastest growing community and one of the greatest places to work, one of the greatest places to live in Canada. And so I was thinking about that the whole time. And actually the first line of the notes I had written for today was that Bruce County is a hub for highly qualified, skilled tradespeople and a leader, a world leader in the energy sector. And so I haven't quite got it figured out, but I think that's going to be our pitch line or our sales pitch. So thanks very much for enlightening me with that. And so in that kind of context, I got a couple of things to talk about. And the first is background. So that is true. That is hopefully not shocking to anybody in this room, but Bruce County, the Bruce region, is a hub for these highly qualified, skilled tradespeople and world leaders in the energy sector. And you don't have to go very far on Highway 21 to bump into one of the over 45 different nuclear suppliers that have moved into the region. And so that's the result of a committed effort between Bruce Power and Bruce County. And so that cluster that's been created really is an opportunity. It brings incredible intellectual talent and expertise to our region. And so that's kind of the first bullet on a context I want to make. The other one is that the Bruce region experiences an incredibly high demand for skilled workforce, and we've talked about that this morning quite a bit. I can't remember the exact numbers. If Gemma's still here, maybe she can straighten me out. But it's something like 80% for apprenticeships. Employers are in demand. 80% for apprenticeships and 74% for journey and tradespeople. Have I got that right, Gemma? Is she still here? Yeah, I've got that right. It's from your survey, so thanks. Thanks for that. So high demand, high quality labor force that exists here. And the other one, of course, is Bruce Power's major component replacement project, the life extension program, and Luke spoke about that a little bit this morning. An incredible opportunity, Canada's largest construction project, bringing $13 billion to the region and to Ontario's economy, and will create thousands, the need for thousands of jobs and nuclear expertise for the next 20 years and beyond. So that's kind of the context, that's the background that we're operating in terms of developing the Nuclear Innovation Institute. And so the next biggest question that I get asked is, what is an innovation institute? What's a Nuclear Innovation Institute? And for me, the easiest way to explain it is the function and the focus. And so the first of three functions that we envision in the Nuclear Innovation Institute is what we're calling the Advanced Technology Hub. I always think of it as an applied research piece. And so the focus areas within that hub, the first function, is things like AI. So we've been talking about that as well this morning. Advanced technology, so robotics, small modular reactors, those kinds of things. Health and medical isotopes. So I think probably raise your hand if you've heard of cobalt-60 and the work that's happening at Bruce Power. So health and medical isotopes. The environment, global warming as well. And there's been some research done already on that. You can check the Nuclear Innovation website for more information there. Operational efficiency. And so these are kind of the key focus areas. And so if you get an understanding of kind of the things that we envision happening here in the context of applied research, that's kind of the first function of three. The second is business development and coordination hubs. So I like to think of the example that we went to go and look at is Communitech. And so it's an incubator and accelerator. And we know through some of the work that Kara's group has done that there's a gap in small, medium enterprises. And so trying to fill that gap and to take advantage of the opportunities that we're seeing here in the region is really kind of key to that function. And so some of the other focus areas in that hub, in that function, are Indigenous economic advancement, business coordination, a regional innovation council, economic development, coordination and development. So that kind of idea around building and growing businesses and supporting entrepreneurs here in Bruce County is kind of that second hub, that second function. The third, and the one I want to really kind of talk about most today, is the talent development and talent coordination hub. And so we've talked a lot about labor, and so one of the key functions that we envision in the Nuclear Innovation Institute, and probably the one that I think is probably furthest along, is the Trades and Skilled Workforce Secretariat. And so the idea for that is we recognize that there are lots of groups out there across the landscape that are doing a lot of really great things to grow and develop our labor market and our labor pool. But where we recognize the gap is with an administrative and coordinative function. So a calculated and coordinated approach to all those great things that are happening out there. And we see the Secretariat is kind of filling that role and filling that gap. Kind of a one-window approach is kind of what we're thinking. And so there are a number of things that we kind of envision the Secretariat doing. The first is taking an inventory of the assets and the resources that exist across our landscape and really trying to connect the dots and find efficiencies and ways new ways of doing things that improve effectiveness. We also think that there's probably a great opportunity for the Secretary to play a role in building collaboration networks and building partnerships, and so that's another key function that we'll kind of work to develop. Just at the break, we were talking about those career pathways and career development and training opportunities, and so that's another kind of core function that the Secretary could play is how to how do I come out of school and get a job in the trades or get a job in the skilled workforce, is the same question that a single mom at 40 has that wants to re-enter the workforce or upgrade her skills. And so creating or helping to facilitate those pathways and make them clear and easy to follow. We also want to link industrial development with employment opportunities. So that seems like a no-brainer. So connecting employers with employees and vice versa. There's also opportunity for promotion of the skilled trades amongst youth and their parents. And so you know, that's a common one that I've heard as well, is that we need to do more, and certainly the Secretariat could help facilitate that. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we envision for the Skilled Trades Secretariat, the Trades and Skilled Workforce Secretariat. And we're working to advance that. And so just I'll end on this note. The next steps, what we're doing next is we're working to hire, or we have hired, a talent development officer. So they're set to start early in April. It's been an interesting and exciting process to go through. We received a lot of really great applications and have successfully managed to offer a job to somebody, which is great. We've got a Regional Skilled Trades Advancement Forum coming up at the end of the month, March 29th. It's a half-day session. It'll feature a lot of, the focus really is to gather input and insights on how and why and who might be able to help us kind of further develop the Secretariat. So that's coming up at the end of the month. And our hope for that workshop is to at least build a framework, an idea, an understanding of what we might do to create an action plan, an engagement strategy. So that workshop is critical. If you can make it, great. And we're going to be trying to take that framework that we developed and grow it into a strategy. So that's about all I wanted to say. If there are any questions, I guess we can take some questions.
If there was someone that was looking at a trade and moved away, I think there's a number of young people that are in the trade, get their apprenticeship, finish, and want to come back. Is there maybe a place where they can register on employment? I mean, if some say they will say that means that these people, for someone to come back, is there a place for that? Because I think there's a lot of young people in their early 20s that are almost finished or ready to write, and they're not in a community without them to come back and say, you know what, they're dreamers and there's an opportunity here. So I'm just wondering if that's something that
Yeah, I think certainly. So we've done a number of kind of feedback type workshops to get to this point, and certainly that is something that we've heard is that people go away to school and they don't necessarily come back, and we want to kind of I think the key function, kind of one of those things that I was mentioning, is those career pathways. So if we can make it very easy and clear what the steps are to become an electrician, or to become a hairdresser, or to become an auto mechanic, or become whatever you want to become, you know, I think that's at least the first step is identifying those pathways and helping facilitate with the partners through a collaborative effort to try to, you know, attract and retain that talent.
And I guess my question is that it's probably really cheap to have those conversations with the secretary. I just moved in the workshop. A lot of students that go to London to go to school, but is there a way, you know, these students can kind of go back to kind of do a lot to learn. And it's just in the hallways. The students get about things there.
Mm-hmm.
We have a large group of students who are from here around Bruce, Burke County. So I think there's an opportunity there so that come back home into their school. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I've always thought that would be a good way to really stick to the
Yeah, absolutely. And where's Tina? Is Tina still in the room? We were at BPI's career fair, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago, and they had busloads of students coming. So we were actually, well, Tina was actually bringing students to, there must have been, 40 different employers in the room, give or take? And so those things are happening. I think as well, if we were talking, if Dave Barrett were in the room or others in the school board, they say that those things are happening. I mean, there's never, it's never perfect, it's never enough, we can always do more, but I think that those things are happening. That's kind of, I think that's part of it. Like, we recognize that these things are happening, but we need to talk together, we need to work together, we need to collaborate, and I think that's really the role that the Secretariat will help to play, is to connect those dots and hopefully to build a collaboration network that does exactly that kind of thing. Okay.
Hi, a couple of weeks ago I had an opportunity to go down to Hanover and visit a facility they have down there called the Launchpad. Have you seen it or heard of it?
I haven't seen it, but I have definitely heard of it.
Yeah, and it's a really exciting facility where they have high school age kids can come in, and they have mock-ups of trade type scenarios. They have a carpentry shop they're working on. They have a welding shop. They have a culinary facility. They have a 3D printing computer lab area, and as well as a drop-in center where kids can come as an alternative to going to the mall or going to hanging around downtown kind of thing. It's really successful, and it's really engaging the kids, and just the mood when I was there at 4:30 in the afternoon, the kids were all having fun, and they were welding. In fact, one of our local guys who was down there and teaches the welding course, he was inviting me down. And is there any chance or any thoughts or any plans to replicate something like that in Bruce County? I know Bruce got a leg up on us in that regard.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I certainly like the idea. I think I've spoken with folks that are there and others that have been there, and certainly it's very well received, and it hits that really key note of engaging youth and their parents, right? Like, so getting them exposed to the skilled trades early and often, and connecting them with the opportunities. So that facility in particular is great because there's cooking, there's like a wide variety of trades that are available there. So
I know the discussion I had with Amy, who's one of the employees down there, is they would love to sort of franchise the idea out to us. So I'm, as a counselor in Saugeen Shores, I'm going to do whatever I can to get some collaboration going and to promote getting something like that going here.
Yeah.
We have lots of school-age kids that don't know what it means to be a welder, or don't know what it means to enter into different trades. So it gives them a chance to ride the horse for a while and see what it feels like before. I know when I was in high school, it's a difficult choice to make because you don't know what that looks and feels like to do those jobs. Right?
Yeah. Even if they don't like it, at least they know they don't like it, right? If they get a chance to try it, and they'll move on to something else that they do like, hopefully. So. Yeah, I think it's a great idea, but I'm not sure if it's advancing. Certainly isn't through the Secretariat. Like, again, it's kind of an administrative coordinator role, but it's an opportunity, sure. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much, Matt. That was great. We are a few minutes behind, so I will have one more speaker. Before I announce the next speaker, I will let you know that if you go to saugeenshores.ca/labor shortage, you'll find all of the stuff for today, including right now there's a feedback form posted. It's mobile friendly. There's no excuse why you won't do it, I'm sure. But if you can please go to saugeenshores.ca/labor shortage when you leave today, when you're out having your lunch, just give us some quick feedback, what you think about the speakers, the content. And I'm not saying that in advance of our next speaker for any specific reason. I'm just joking. I'm pleased to introduce Jay Posner, my colleague and co-host of the Shore Report, our municipal podcast. And Jay's here on behalf of the town of Saugeen Shores, bringing an update specific to affordable housing.
Thank you, Jess. And as we used to say in the early episodes of the Shore Report, a little rhyme would be the Labor Report today. I think that's a good way of leading. Thank you, Jess. You made me promise not to roast anybody or you at this hearing, but I think that feedback comment was almost the same. So, but I'll get right into it. Saugeen Shores has made the first few tentative steps on providing more affordable housing support. It's not that we haven't been involved in the past, but it's been more fits and starts. So Project Habitat for Humanity, for example, was a few years ago. But we want to focus on a more sustained effort, more sustained focus on affordability, so that our economic and community futures depend on it, I believe. And specifically, we're looking at more safe fail programs and projects to see what works here in Saugeen Shores. After hearing today that it's not a cookie cutter, you got to place matters, so you have to respect what works in one community may not work in Saugeen Shores or anywhere else. But safe fail projects are small projects that don't cost a lot, that you can sort of get up and running quickly, and that the risk of failure is minimized because they don't cost very much. And so we're looking at those, and I'm sort of setting that table here because I want the councillors in the room to realize that not everything we do will be successful, so that those failures shouldn't have too much weight for you, but it sure beats the hell out of doing nothing. So what are we specifically looking at? Well, we're looking at three things rather. We're looking at construction incentives, tenant supports, and some policy changes. As we tried in 2018, we want to continue offering construction incentives to developers and builders to encourage new housing to be constructed. Especially at least this year, we want to be targeting incentives for rental housing, which is, in our research, the greatest need in Saugeen Shores. And we've been, over the last few months, collaborating with Bruce County Housing, Saugeen Shores Ministerial, the YMCA, and United Way, and other service providers in the region. And we think that's the specific area that we want to focus on in the near term. But what does that mean? What do the incentives look like? Well, this is municipal investment to support builders and developers directly to reduce the costs of development. So we'd be looking at providing development charges credits, property tax rebates, and fee rebates. And that would be things like your building permit costs, planning application fees, or landfill tipping fees for renovations, for example. Does any of this make sense to any of you? We're looking at tenant supports as well. This would be unique to us. This would be us directly involved potentially with tenants to support their reducing their cost of living. And what we've been talking about internally are what are municipal services that tenants generally pay for, and from what we know, it's that they pay for water services generally directly. The landlord puts that on the tenants. And so we're looking at means and ways of offsetting those costs, as well as garbage bag tags. On the policy end, two main policy documents, our development charges bylaw. Many communities provide reductions, as I've outlined, for construction incentives, but there may be other ways of using the development charges bylaw that doesn't have a negative impact on the town's ability to pay for our other facilities like water, sewer, roads, recreation facilities, fire and police services. The DC bylaw, development charges bylaw, is quite a blunt tool, so I'm putting that as a caution that may not lead anywhere. And we're also updating our official plan. Many of you know that we're due for our 5-year review, and so a part of that is council's identified that affordable housing has to play a large role in those policies, and I'm just bringing that up as things we're looking at. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Okay, so that is the end of our event, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I really appreciate the community's support and registering for this event. Thanks to the media for coming. Thank you to Bruce Power for sponsoring our event, and again to Bruce County for providing this space. So thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.